Welcome back, brothers, to Hammer Lore. Tonight's story, we're diving into the lore of the Howling. Before getting to madness, be sure to like, comment any videos and topics you want to see in the future. Be sure to subscribe from the Emperor. And I want to thank you guys for the support. I've been killing it like usual. Now, let's get to the video.
The first scream did not pass through air. It passed through sanctified copper, through the wet meat of human minds, through the silvered bones of astropaths chained in prayer beneath the relay spires of Watch Station Golgotha. It came without warning, without cipher, without the ordered harmonics of sanctioned transmission. It came as pressure. It came as command. It came as a hand large enough to close around souls. The astropathic choir had been singing the Emperor's Light through the catalexis marches for 300 years of station record. Their blinded faces turned toward the golden beacon none of them had ever seen with mortal eyes. They sat in descending rings beneath the transept dome, each one bolted into a throne of brass restraints and black iron prayer hooks, their skin marked with warding script, their tongues pierced with tiny aquila charms to keep blasphemy from escaping unbidden. Incense burned in skull censers. Cherubim servitors circled overhead on trembling wings, chanting coordinates in dead monotone. Beneath the choir, cogitator banks clattered and spat parchment like the bowels of some ancient beast. Then, every candle in the chamber bent inward. Choirmaster Ephran Voss opened his mouth to demand silence and found another voice waiting behind his teeth. It spoke before he could. "I rule the prayer." The nearest astropath convulsed so violently that his restraints tore the flesh from his wrists. His eyes were already sewn shut, yet white light burst through the stitches, boiling the lids until they split. He screamed, but the scream carried syntax, and the syntax was not human. "I rule the blood." Across the choir, men who had endured the soul binding, men who had stood before a fragment of the master of mankind's radiance and survived, began to weep black tears. They clawed at their own throats. Some bit through their tongues. Others sat rigid as statues, while their skulls cracked audibly under an invisible force. "I rule the species." The message did not arrive once. It arrived from hundreds of directions at once, layered atop itself, until the chamber became a cathedral of psychic thunder. Segmentum relay codes flashed across the cogitator pulpits. The names of worlds poured forth faster than the servo-scribes could inscribe them. Malachor Tertius, Varadon Secundus, Gethsemar, Darnak's choir, Ulvorn's rest, the shrine moons of Pelagos, the forge enclaves of St. Corda's anvil, the agrarian chains of Alecto's crown, the prison worlds beyond the Iron Lenten route. Their designations came in floods, each one followed by identical confirmation. Compliance achieved, compliance achieved, compliance achieved. Not surrender, not rebellion, not even silence. Compliance. Ephran Voss tried to raise the warding canticles. His mind reached instinctively toward the Emperor's Light, toward the distant golden mountain that had guided his soul through half a century of sanctioned service. But between him and that light, something vast uncoiled. It was not the warp as he knew it. It was not demon laughter, nor the sweet rot of temptation, nor the many-voiced hunger of the abyss. This was colder, more ordered, a tyranny of thought so absolute that even fear seemed inefficient before it. He felt the outline of a will spread across the stars, not burning worlds to ash, not cracking continents with orbital fire, not descending upon mankind beneath banners and war horns. It conquered by entering the command to kneel. Ephran saw governors in their palace bastions lowering themselves before empty halls, their household guards standing behind them with laser guns aimed at their own skulls. He saw navy captains changing course without order, their hands moving across strategium plates while their mouths recited the same sentence in perfect unison. He saw administratum scribes in parchment vaults pause mid-tally, dip quills in their own blood, and write a name none of them had ever learned. He saw planetary commanders ordering loyal regiments to fire upon relief convoys, tears streaming down their faces as their voices calmly confirmed tactical necessity. He saw churches packed with kneeling citizens, each man speaking with the same stolen breath. Cacodominus. The name struck the choir like a shell impact. Astropath Halvorn's head burst against the back of his throne in a wet halo of bone chips and cooked grey matter. The throne did not release him. It held the twitching body upright, while smoke curled from the ruin of his face. Two more astropaths began laughing in low, synchronized pulses, their bodies shaking as if tugged by strings. A junior Lex mechanic ran for the blast door, but a servo skull dipped from the rafters and drilled a sedative needle into his neck before he could break quarantine. The station's confessor entered with 6 armsmen in void black carapace. He carried a flamer in both hands and a book of censure chained to his chest. "Name the corruption," he commanded. Every astropath in the chamber turned toward him. Their stitched eyes were burning, their mouths opened together. "I am not corruption, I am correction." The confessor fired. Promethium washed across the first ring of the choir. Robes ignited, skin peeled back in curling sheets, fat hissed and popped. Restraints glowed dull red. Still they spoke. Burning men sat in their thrones and delivered coordinates, fleet routes, tithe registries, obedience confirmations, all in the voice of something that wore distance like a cloak. The confessor kept the trigger depressed until the flamer coughed dry. By then, the message had already passed onward. Within the hour, Watch Station Golgotha became the first relay in the marches to transmit the classification that later scribes of the Adeptus Terra would seal beneath black wax and death oaths: the Catalexis heresy. It was a small phrase for an atrocity that swallowed maps. Heresy implied choice. Heresy implied the diseased luxury of belief. It suggested sermons whispered in cellars, icons defaced beneath moonlight, traitors raising banners over stolen guns. This was fouler. This was the theft of will at planetary scale. The Catalexis worlds did not merely rise against the Imperium. They were taken by the roots of thought and made into one obedience network, one empire of puppeted flesh, one congregation of meat and iron praying to an unseen Xenos tyrant. 1,300 planetary systems became instruments. Men still labored in manufactoria, but their hands served another master. Men still crewed ships, but their helms turned toward alien design. Men still marched under banners bearing the Aquila, but their orders came from a mind that had never bowed before terror. The populations of entire worlds became meat tools, soldiers, laborers, cultists, vox mouths. Hab blocks became barracks, cathedrals became signal towers, astropathic choirs became screaming organs in a body stretched across the stars. And from system to system, across the drowned approaches of Catalexis, the same command pulsed: obey. The Black Templars heard it through a dying man. He was brought aboard the battle barge Judgment of Dawn in a sealed medici casket, escorted by chapter serfs bearing censers and execution blades. He had once been an astropath of the Adeptus Astra Telepathica, though little of his sanctioned dignity remained. Half his body had been burned down to the bone. The left side of his face was a fused mask of waxen scar and blackened meat. His eyes, though blind by right, had boiled white in their sockets and hardened like pearls of cooked fat. Restraints pinned him to the slab, not for his protection, but for that of those who stood near him. Marshal Odo Serevan watched from the head of the chamber, helm mag-locked beneath one arm, his scarred face motionless as stone. His armor was black, its plates edged in bone white, its tabard marked by old blood and older vows. Chains bound his sword to his wrist. Purity seals hung from him in clusters. His gaze did not soften when the casket locks hissed open. Around him stood his sword brethren, helmed and silent. Castellan Bor's cask loomed at his right hand, broad as a bunker door, one gauntlet resting upon the pommel of a power sword. Reclusiarch Severian Morcant stood opposite the slab, Crozius held upright. Skullhelm turned toward the ruined astropath, as if staring down into a grave that had dared to speak. The apothecary withdrew a needle from the prisoner's neck. The astropath convulsed. For a moment, there was only the rasp of failing lungs. Then the voice came again. I rule the prayer. The chamber's lumen globes flickered. A serf dropped to his knees, vomiting blood across the iron deck. I rule the blood. Castellan Cask drew his bolt pistol and aimed at the astropath's skull. Marshal Serevan raised one hand. Not yet. The astropath's broken body arched against the restraints. His lips split. Teeth cracked under the pressure of the words, forcing themselves through him. I rule the species. Reclusiarch Morcant stepped closer. The skull mask of his helm made his voice a tomb, speaking judgment. You rule nothing that the Emperor's wrath cannot unmake. The astropath smiled. It was not the smile of a man. The burned flesh pulled back from his teeth in a shape that looked engineered rather than felt. Little Crusader, the voice whispered through him. Little blade, little hate. I have worn kings. I have worn choirs. I have worn fleets. I have worn worlds until their mountains knelt. The chains on Marshal Serevan's sword clinked softly as his fingers tightened. What are you? The astropath's body shuddered. Somewhere inside his chest, bone broke. I am the dominion after faith. I am the silence after command. I am the mind that shall spare your species the burden of itself. Morcant lifted his Crozius until its winged head hovered above the astropath's face. Xenos. The word fell like a sentence of death. The astropath began to scream, but the scream bent into laughter, and the laughter into a transmission. Vox grills along the chamber walls sparked to life. A captured loop vomited through them in waves of distortion. Marching feet, engine thunder, the roar of crowds speaking as one. Then a deeper sound, metal footfalls like fortress gates slamming shut. A hololithic image guttered above the slab. At first it was a ruin of static. Then shapes resolved. Knights, 17 of them. God machines of fallen households, their heraldry scorched, their banners remade with unknown sigils, their noble cockpits reduced to prisons of psychic wire and screaming command thrones. Dreadblades, each one walking alone beneath the curse of its own damnation, now yoked to a single alien will. Their thermal cannons incinerated loyal bastions, their Reaper chainswords carved through regiments, their feet crushed men into red paste beneath plasteel toes. One strode through a cathedral nave while the faithful knelt before it, and every man in the congregation opened his throat with a ritual blade at the exact same instant. The hololith died. The astropath exhaled smoke. 17 iron saints have bent, the Xenos voice said. How many black knights shall I require for you? Cask fired. The bolt round entered the astropath's brow and detonated inside the skull. The head came apart in a burst of bone fragments, white eye fluid, and wet brain matter. The slab shook under the impact. Smoke rolled from the stump of the neck. Whatever had spoken through him did not scream. It had already gone. For several breaths, no one moved. Then Reclusiarch Morcant turned toward the marshal. There can be no rescue, he said. Only severance. Every mind fully taken is a loaded weapon. Every choir a cannon. Every governor a traitor in borrowed flesh. We cleanse what can be cleansed. We burn what cannot. Marshal Serevan looked down at the ruined corpse. A man of the Imperium had died there. A servant who had endured holy mutilation to carry mankind's messages through the void. Yet at the end, his flesh had been used as a speaking tube for an alien tyrant. The marshal's expression did not change. Summon the captains. The order passed through the judgment of dawn like a blade drawn from a sheath. Across the battle barge, the crusade woke to war. Armurium vaults opened with grinding thunder. Chapter serfs carried bolters from reliquary racks and checked each sacred weapon with oil, oath, and whispered catechism. Chain's words were awakened by tech serfs who bowed as the machine spirits growled. Power fists hummed inside stasis cradles. Flamers were filled with consecrated promethium. Melter charges were stamped with kill script. Thunder hammers were lifted by servitor hoists and presented to sword brethren beneath banners older than the worlds they were sworn to defend. In the launch decks, drop pods hung like iron coffins in their descent racks. Thunderhawks rested with wings folded beneath gantry lights, their hulls painted in black and white, their assault ramps scarred by centuries of war. Rhinos and razorbacks sat chained in armored rows. Land raiders brooded like temple fortresses, their lascannons sealed beneath prayer cloths until the hour of wrath. Predators, vindicators, and siege tanks waited with engines cold and hungry. Dreadnought sarcophagi stood in alcoves lit by corpse candles, each ancient warrior sleeping within his armored tomb until the chaplains called him back to slaughter. Beyond the battle barge, the crusade fleet gathered. Strike cruisers burned their engines in disciplined formation. Escort squadrons slid into picket lines. Mass conveyors carried men, tanks, munitions, shrine components, execution stocks, and the endless machinery of imperial war. Macro cannon decks loaded shells the size of hab blocks. Torpedo bays filled their launch tubes. Teleportariums were sanctified by tech marines and watched by armed brethren who trusted neither miracle nor machine without a blade ready. In the reliquary chapels chained deep within the holds, skulls of martyrs rattled in their iron cages. The captains assembled beneath the nave of the strategium, where a hololithic star map of the Catalexis marches rotated in bleeding red. World after world darkened as new fragments arrived. Some bore the sigil of rebellion, others bore the mark of silence. The worst bore a black crown burned into the display by corrupted data, appearing without command, spreading like mold. Marshal Serevan stood before them in full warplate now, helm locked, voice amplified by the Vox grill into something harsh enough to scrape rust from iron. "We have received no command from Terra," he said. "We require none." No captain objected. The alien has placed its thought upon imperial worlds. It has bent governors, fleets, choirs, and night engines. It has taken mankind's servants and worn them like carrion robes. This is not a war of compliance. This is not a war of reclamation. This is a crusade of execution. Reclusiarch Morcant struck the butt of his Crozius against the deck. The sound rang through the strategium. "Abhor the witch," he intoned. The assembled warriors answered as one. "Destroy the witch. Suffer not the unclean. To live. Accept any challenge, no matter the odds. Uphold the honor of the Emperor. By blade, by bolt, by blood." Marshal Serevan turned toward the red wound of Catalexis upon the map. "The Cacodominus rules 1,300 systems by theft of will. It has mistaken dominion for strength. It has mistaken mankind's suffering for submission. We shall teach it the difference." A low growl passed through the gathered brethren. It was not rage uncontrolled. It was hatred disciplined by oath, hatred given armor and ammunition, hatred sanctified until it became duty. Any human recovered from full enthrallment is to be bound, tested, and judged. Any who speaks with the alien's voice dies. Any choir compromised burns. Any vessel that answers command from the Xenos is to be destroyed. We do not bleed for the illusion of mercy, while the witch tightens its hand around more worlds. Morcant's skull helm tilted. "The Emperor will know his own," the Reclusiarch said. "Our task is to send them to him clean, or send their desecrated flesh to ash." Far below, the astropathic sanctums of the Judgment of Dawn began to scream. At first it was one voice, then another, then all of them. The strategium shook as emergency sigils flared. A serf rushed forward, face pale, but halted when Karsk's pistol turned toward him. "Speak." "My lord," the serf stammered. The choir reports contact, not from Terra, not from any sanctioned relay. The same transmission is repeating through all channels. The Marshal did not look away from the map. Play it. The Vox opened. For a heartbeat there was only static, wet and deep, like lungs drowning in oil. Then the voice returned, vast and intimate, pressing against every helm, every skull, every secret fear. Come. The star map flickered. Red routes appeared through the marches. Not imperial routes, not safe routes, but paths drowned in warp shadow and dead signals. Come, little crusade! Marshal Seravan drew his sword. The chained blade hissed free, its edge catching the hololithic red until it looked aflame. To translation stations, he ordered. All vessels, all decks, all warriors. The crusade begins now. The fleet answered with engines. Across the void, plasma drives flared like newborn suns. Geller fields were blessed by chanting tech marines. Navigators were sealed within their towers. Gun crews knelt beside macro shells and kissed the Aquila stamped into their casings. In the launch bays, Black Templars locked helms, checked magazines, tightened oath chains, and stood ready beneath the thunder of awakening war machines. The Judgment of Dawn turned its prow toward the drowned Catalexis routes. In the astropathic sanctum, every bound psyker aboard began to weep blood in perfect unison. Then the warp opened, and the Black Templars sailed into the scream. The cathedral hangar of the Judgment of Dawn was large enough to swallow a fortress and still have room for the dead. Its vaulted ceiling vanished into incense haze and engine shadow. Armored cherubim circled between chains thick as siege towers, dragging censers that spilled blue smoke over the gathered host. Icons of the Emperor hung from adamantine ribs. Banners taken from burned crusades stirred in the recycled air, each one stiff with age, blood, and the dust of dead worlds. Beneath them stood the Black Templars, ranked in black ceramite and bone-white heraldry, silent as a field of execution stones. Thunderhawks slept upon their launch rails with their assault ramps open like iron jaws. Drop pods hung in vertical racks, their interiors dark, their restraint thrones waiting for warriors who would be fired from orbit like judgment given shape. Rhinos and land raiders rested beneath flood lamps and prayer scripts, their armor plates marked with kill tallies and battle damage that no serf had dared polish away. Servo arms moved above them with ritual slowness, fixing purity seals, feeding ammunition belts, tightening track links, blessing fuel lines, and chaining reliquaries to hulls that would soon grind over the bodies of the enthralled. The warriors had come without summons after translation. Every brother knew where he was required. Every neophyte knew where to kneel. Every initiate knew where to stand. Every sword brother knew which blade to bear and which oath to renew. That was the way of the crusade. The ship itself had become a cathedral of war, and the hangar was its nave. Reclusiarch Severian Morcant walked before them in skull helm and black plate, his Crozius held upright, its winged head wrapped in strips of parchment, inked with condemnations. Chaplains followed behind him, each bearing chains in both hands. Not ceremonial chains alone, but links of iron, engraved, blessed, oiled, and darkened by the touch of generations. They moved down the ranks and bound the warriors again to the weapons they would carry into the Catalexis dark. A chain was wound around a gauntlet and a bolt rifle grip, another around a wrist and the hilt of a chainsword, another around a storm shield's inner brace, another around the casing of a heavy flamer whose pilot light already hissed with impatient hunger. The sound of links tightening became a kind of music, a harsh iron hymn beneath the mutter of litanies. Morcant's voice rose through the hangar vox, cold and absolute. Brothers of the eternal crusade, the witch has placed its hand upon mankind. The ranks did not shift. It has not come as a petitioner. It has not come as a conqueror beneath honest banners. It has come as infection, as command, as theft. It has worn the faithful as masks. It has spoken through the burned mouths of servants. It has turned choirs into weapons and worlds into organs. He stopped before the central aisle, where the greatest banner of the gathered force hung from a chain gantry, bearing the black cross upon white. Beneath it stood Marshal Odo Serevan, helm locked beneath one arm, his face cut by old scars and lit by the red glow of the Strategium Lumen banks beyond the hangar arch. Morkant turned from the Marshal to the host. "What answer does the Emperor demand?" The reply struck the hangar like a broadside. "Abhor the witch." Morkant lifted his crozius. "Destroy the witch." The warriors answered louder. "Destroy the witch." Again, "Destroy the witch." The words rolled through the chamber, taken up by serfs, armsmen, tank crews, munition bearers, and half-crippled veterans watching from iron balconies. There were no librarians among the Black Templars. No robed brother stood apart with sanctioned witch sight and careful counsel. No warrior of the chapter called upon the warp as weapon or shield. The Templars had brought bolters, blades, flame, armor, hatred, and faith. That would be enough, or they would die, proving that nothing less had been worthy. Morkant spoke the second vow with less volume and therefore with greater menace. "Suffer not the unclean." The answer came as a growl from thousands of throats. "To live." "Suffer not the alien." "To live." "Suffer not the enthralled who speaks with stolen voice." A pause moved through the host, not from doubt, but from the weight of what would follow. To live. Marshal Serevan watched them take the vow and knew what it meant. Whole cities would burn because hesitation would feed the enemy. Regiments would be cut down while still wearing imperial colors. Priests would be shot at their own altars if the alien moved their tongues. Governors would be dragged from thrones and executed without confession if their minds had become gates. The crusade would not be clean. No war worth naming ever was. At the edge of the assembly, sword brother Aldrich Thane stood with his helm under one arm and a drawn blade in the other. He did not hear the final repetition of the vow. He heard screaming, not from the hangar, not from the decks below, not from the astropathic sanctums where the bound psychers still wept blood and whispered warnings through clenched teeth. The screaming came from inside the darkness behind his eyes. He saw a skull the size of a moon, pale and cracked, its sockets filled with cold stars. Cables descended from it like gallows ropes, each one ending in a hooked throne, a flayed body, a wired brain, a kneeling king. Around it circled worlds in chains. Cities screamed, oceans foamed red. Men in billions opened their mouths and spoke one name until their jaws split. Cacodominus. Thane's grip tightened around his sword until the leather beneath his gauntlet creaked. The skull turned toward him in the vision. It had no lips, yet it smiled. A hand closed around his shoulder. He snapped back into the hangar with his blade half raised. Sword brother Gideon Wrath stood beside him, helm turned slightly, the red lenses unreadable. "You hear it," Wrath said. Thane's jaw worked once before the answer came. "I see it." Wrath said nothing. That was answer enough. He looked toward the Reclusiarch, who had already seen them. Morkant's skull helm faced Thane across the aisle. "Bring him." The chaplains came without haste. Thane did not resist them. He handed his sword to a serf, unclasped the oath shield from his shoulder, and stepped from the ranks. His personal heraldry was stripped away beneath the watching host. The badges of old campaigns were removed. The small tokens of squad honor were taken. Even the name scroll at his breast was cut free. He stood in black armor made suddenly bare, as if the man he had been was being erased by sacred knife. Marshal Serevan approached only after the stripping was complete. "What did you see?" the marshal asked. Thane looked toward the sealed void doors at the end of the hangar, beyond which the warp pressed against the Geller field like an ocean of teeth. A throne of nerves, a skull with stars inside it, a kingdom of kneeling worlds. His voice roughened. "And a road. It leads through fire. Morkant stepped close. Did it speak? It called us small. A few of the nearest warriors growled. Thane continued. It called me useful. The chaplain raised his crozius and touched its winged head to Thane's breastplate. Then it is afraid of the blade it has named. From a reliquary casket carried by servitors, the armor of faith was brought forth. Its black plates had been polished until they drank the light. Its white cross was stark and merciless. Chaplains recited rites as the old armor was removed and the sacred panoply sealed around Thane's body. Each plate locked into place with the sound of a tomb closing. Purity seals were fixed to the gorget, vambrace, and greaves. Oath parchment hung from him like funeral scripture. Then the black sword was presented. It was long, dark, and severe, a weapon without ornament beyond necessity. Its edge seemed to hold the absence of light. A serf carrying it trembled beneath the honor and terror of bearing such a thing. Morkant took the blade and turned toward Thane. "You are not captain," the reclusiarch said. "You are not marshal. You are not brother among equals in this hour. You are the Emperor's wrath made singular. You do not command the crusade. You seek the greatest foe and end it." Thane knelt. Morkant placed the black sword across his gauntlets. "Rise, champion!" A roar answered his standing. Not cheering. Black Templars did not cheer as mortal soldiers cheered. It was a war cry, a declaration of murder yet to be made holy by completion. Thane lifted the blade, and for a moment every brother in the hangar saw not one warrior, but an omen in black plate. The vox chimes sounded from the strategium above. Marshal Serevan turned from the host and entered the command nave with Morkant beside him. The great chamber beyond the hangar held the campaign map in red and gold, a rotating void of wounded stars. Captains, castellans, shipmasters, and tech marines stood around it. Servitors moved in alcoves, slotting data wafers into cogitator shrines. Hololithic projections stuttered as corrupted transmissions attempted to overwrite imperial cartography with alien patterning. Malachor Tertius burned at the center of the display. Serevan pointed to it with one armored finger. "The first blow falls here." Morkant's skull helm turned slightly. "The source lies deeper. The source is defended by a network. We break the relays, isolate the voice, and deny it bodies." "Delay feeds witches," Morkant said. "Every hour spent cutting branches gives the root more time to coil around another world. We drive through, we strike the head, and arrive blind, overextended, and surrounded by 1,300 systems of enthralled flesh," Serevan answered. "Zeal is not license for waste." Morkant's crozius clicked against the deck as he stepped closer. "Waste is leaving the witch alive because we feared the cost of reaching it." The captains remained silent. None mistook disagreement for division. Among the Black Templars, strategy and wrath often shared the same table, and neither was gentle. Before Serevan could answer, the strategium doors opened with mechanical thunder. The Mechanicus entered as a procession of red robes, iron limbs, incense burners, and weaponized calculation. At their center moved Magos Dominus Hesteron 9, a tall figure whose body had been surrendered almost entirely to sacred machinery. His face was a bronze mask set with green optic lenses. Mechadendrites unfolded from his back like the limbs of a steel insect. Data cables trailed behind him, carried by hunched servitors whose mouths had been sewn shut. Behind the Magos came hololithic carriers, showing cohorts of battle automata secured in the holds of Mechanicus macro haulers, Cortex engines, Cybernetica maniples, siege crawlers, munition servitors, shielded data shrines, crawling artillery platforms, machines built to walk into fire without flinching, to receive command without fear, to kill without pity, and die without prayer. Hesteron 9 bowed in the minimal degree that protocol required. Marshal Serevan, Reclusiarch Morkant, machine analysis confirms biological cognition is the primary vulnerability within the catalexis theatre. Flesh command systems are compromised. Astropathic communication is compromised. Mortal crew discipline is compromised under exposure. Recommendation: iron first, flesh second, faith throughout. Morcant stared at the Magos. Do not presume to order the faithful by equation. Correction: I do not order. I submit survival probability. The alien governs minds. Machine spirits resist differently. Cortex automata may enter psychic saturation zones, where mortal regiments become hostile assets. A tech marine beside the map inclined his helm. The Magos speaks utility, not doctrine. Serevan studied the projection of Malachor Tertius. The Shrine Forge world had once been a place of sacred industry, its manufactoria crowned with cathedrals, its ore rivers worked beneath hymn towers, its plasma furnaces tended by priests of iron and flesh. Now the image shifted under hostile data. The cathedrals had been rewired. Spire tops bristled with antennae grown from bone, brass, nerve cable, and stolen augmetic matter. Choir vaults had been opened and remade into amplifier pits. Enslaved astropaths hung in suspensor chains, their bodies pierced by conductor rods, their skulls connected by wet cables to vox towers that pulsed like exposed hearts. Bells once rung for the Omnissiah, and the Emperor now tolled in patterns that made nearby minds bleed. Malachor Tertius was not merely occupied, it had been made into a mouth. Serevan closed his fist, and the image froze. Then iron. Shall go first. Morcant turned toward him. And the champion? Held until the road is worthy of him. The road is made worthy by his tread. The road is made possible by dead relays and broken guns, Serevan said. The Cacodominus wants us to hurl ourselves at its heart in rage. We shall give it rage with discipline. Hesteron 9 emitted a short burst of Binharic approval that made nearby serfs wince. Strategic convergence. Proposed assault structure follows. Navy bombardment groups suppress orbital stations. Cybernetica cohorts land within psychic broadcast districts. Black Templars spearhead cathedral breaches. Mortal armsmen secure perimeter zones under commissarial oversight and kill protocols. Macro haulers deliver siege assets after void shields collapse. Attrition estimates severe, acceptable. Your estimates are not permissions, Morcant said. Agreement. They are warnings ignored by the devout. For a heartbeat, the room held the promise of violence. Then Marshal Serevan spoke, and all lesser tensions died. We are not numerous enough to drown 1,300 systems in our blood. That is not our purpose. The Imperium will bring millions of armsmen, soldiers, void crews, indentured labor cohorts, macro batteries, bombardment wings, and the grinding weight of human war. They will kill by mass. We will kill by meaning. We break the nodes. We take the sanctums. We cut the voice wherever it speaks. He looked to every captain in turn. Malachor Tertius is the first throat. The War Council bowed its assent. Hours later, the cathedral hangar shook as the fleet made ready for real space translation and war deployment. Hundreds of Imperial ships burned in formation around the Judgment of Dawn. Navy cruisers, escorts, troop conveyors, Mechanicus macro haulers, munition barges, shrine vessels, and black-hulled strikecraft filled the void like a migrating armada of iron cathedrals. Millions of mortal servants moved through their decks, checking seals, loading shells, locking themselves behind blast doors, praying that the minds inside their own skulls would remain theirs when the guns began. In the hangar nave, Emperor's champion Aldrich Thane stood alone before the sealed assault ramp of a Thunderhawk. His new armor felt heavier than plate. It felt like sentence and absolution together. The black sword rested point down before him, both gauntlets upon its hilt. Morcant approached without sound. "Do you still see it?" the Reclusiarch asked. Thane did not look away from the void door. "Yes." "What does it do?" "It waits." "What do you feel?" Thane's answer came after a long silence. "Hatred." "Good. And hunger. Morkant's skull helm turned toward him. Whose? Thane raised the black sword. Its dark edge reflected nothing. Mine. The hangar klaxons sounded. Launch crews ran beneath the wings of gunships. Drop pod restraints opened. Tank engines woke in growling waves. Across the fleet, bombardment decks reported readiness. In the sealed astropathic sanctums, the choirs wept and shook and bled into their restraints as Malachor Tertius drew closer. Thane stepped toward the Thunderhawk ramp. His voice was low, but the vox carried it to every warrior near him. "Show me the Witch King," he said. "I will bring the Emperor its head." The warp spat the Crusade fleet back into reality, like a mouth rejecting iron. For one breathless instant, the void around Malachor Tertius appeared dead and still, a star system held beneath the cold gaze of distant suns. Then every vox channel opened at once and began to scream. It was not a single distress call. It was a storm of them, layered in prayer, panic, command code, hymn, static, and pleading. Voices of orbital traffic masters begged for deliverance while their stations powered lance batteries. Captains identified themselves as loyal servants of the throne while turning torpedo tubes toward the Black Templars. Choirs of broken astropaths chanted coordinates in reverse. Planetary defense officers sobbed through sealed command channels as they gave firing solutions against Imperial hulls. Every voice begged, every weapon fired. Malachor Tertius hung below them, veiled in ash cloud and industrial lightning. Its continents were black with manufactoria. Its seas were choked with chemical slag. Cathedral foundries rose from the night, sighed in pillars of fire, their spires rewired into obscene antennae of brass, bone, and nerve cable. Around the world drifted defense monitors, orbital weapons platforms, slave ships, forge hulks, and manufactorum carcasses turned into gun bastions. They bore Imperial markings. They transmitted Imperial recognition. They fired with alien obedience. On the strategium deck of the Judgment of Dawn, Marshal Odo Serevan watched the hololithic storm unfold in crimson and gold. Enemy icons multiplied until the display looked less like a system map and more like an arterial wound. A Navy shipmaster's voice burst through the command vox. "My Lord Marshal, Defense Platform St. Corda's Vigil identifies as loyal and requests sanctuary. It is powering torpedo banks." The platform transmitted at the same moment, a choir of mortal voices speaking through static. "In the Emperor's name, save us. In the Emperor's name, forgive us. In the Emperor's name, receive our fire." The torpedoes launched. Serevan did not blink. "Destroy it." Lance fire from the Judgment of Dawn and 3 escort cruisers crossed the void in white spears. The defense platform's void shields flared, shuddered, and collapsed under the impact. Macro shells followed, each one a cathedral bell of death hurled across space. They struck the platform's armored flank and split it open, ripping through kilometers of plating, gun decks, chapel domes, reactor housings, and crew vaults. Atmosphere burst outward in glittering clouds filled with bodies. A final torpedo detonated inside the broken station's magazine, and St. Corda's Vigil became a second sun. Still, its vox signal continued for several seconds. "Forgive us, forgive us, forgive us." Then the static ate it. "All vessels broadcasting Imperial code while engaging the fleet are spiritually dead," Serevan said. "No appeals, no delay. Burn them from the Emperor's sky." Across the Crusade fleet, guns answered. The void became war. Lance batteries stabbed through armored hulls and carved molten wounds through ship ribs. Macro cannon broadsides thundered with such force that the battle barge's own bones seemed to groan. Shells the size of shrines crossed the dark and struck slave cruisers bow first, punching through prows, decks, and crew compartments before exploding deep inside. Defense moons cracked beneath bombardment, their surface batteries vanishing into boiling craters. Attack craft swarmed like angry insects between the great ships, chased by flak storms that filled space with spinning fire. Thunderhawks and Fury interceptors died in burning knots. Slave fighters rammed Imperial bombers head-on, their pilots chanting prayers for rescue as they murdered the men trying to save them. A Manufactorum hulk drifted across the fleet's path, vast and rusted, its engines dead, its gun ports opening one by one like infected eyes. It carried no living bridge crew, according to Auspex. Only heat signatures fused into walls and one enormous psychic pulse beating from its central reactor nave. It transmitted a child's voice. "Please, my father says you are angels." The hulk fired. Its first salvo tore the prow from an Imperial escort. The escort's plasma drive ruptured, and the ship folded in upon itself in a silent bloom of white flame. Serevan turned to the gunnery throne. "Break that corpse." The Judgment of Dawn gave answer. Its prow lance punched through the hulk from stem to stern, a beam of sanctified ruin burning through iron, bone shrines, slave engines, and whatever had been wired into the reactor nave. The hulk split slowly, as if some dead god were being torn open. Thousands of bodies spilled into vacuum, still tethered by cables, still moving in spasms as the cold took them. Reclusiarch Morcant stood beside the Marshal, Crozius grounded against the deck. "Mercy would have fed it," he said. "Mercy can be given after victory," Serevan replied. "For some. For those not already dead." Below them, Malachor Tertius turned beneath the fleet, a world praying through broken teeth. The order to deploy went out through the strike-craft channels. Drop pods loaded. Thunderhawks fired engines. Assault boats sealed. The Black Templars entered their descent coffins, with weapons chained to their wrists and vows locked behind their teeth. In the hangar bays, chaplains walked the rows, striking armor plates with the heads of their Crozius and naming each warrior a blade in the Emperor's hand. Castellan Bor's Cask stood at the mouth of his drop pod, power sword mag locked to his hip, bolt pistol in hand. His helm lenses burned red. "Target is the Cathedral of St. Ulvorn," he voxed to his assault force. "It was a house of the Emperor. It is now a throat for the witch. We close it." Sword Brother Gideon Wrath answered from a neighboring pod. "By bolt." The warriors around him replied. "By blade. By fire. By faith." The launch runes turned green. The drop pods fell. They plunged through the upper atmosphere inside coffins of flame. Malachor's flak batteries reached up in a million burning hands. Shell bursts hammered the descent formation. One pod vanished in a direct hit, becoming a brief smear of black fragments and red fire. Another spun away, trailing molten armor, its occupants chanting even as it broke apart. Thunderhawks roared through the barrage, heavy bolters and lascannons punishing gun towers as they dived. The air was thick with ash, smoke, and screaming vox echoes. Cask's pod struck the plaza before the Cathedral of St. Ulvorn, with enough force to shatter the ferrocrete beneath it. Restraints blew open. The ramp slammed down. The world outside was madness. The plaza had once been a place of pilgrimage, broad and monumental, lined with statues of saints, forge martyrs, and armored heroes of the Imperium. Now the statues had been decapitated and wired into speaker towers. Thousands of civilians knelt between them in soot-stained work robes, their hands nailed together in prayer. Behind them stood planetary defense regiments in full battle kit, laser-guns raised, faces wet with tears. Servitors jerked beneath cables that ran from their skulls into vox spires. Priests in torn vestments stood upon pulpit platforms, their heads opened from crown to jaw, their exposed brains threaded with brass wire. Every mouth in the plaza spoke together. "Welcome, little knives." Then the defenders opened fire. Las beams slashed across the drop zone. Autocannons hammered the pods. Stubber rounds rang from Templar plate. A mortal armsman following in a second wave took a round through the chest and burst backward in a spray of blood and shattered rib. A Black Templar initiate staggered as 3 last shots melted divots into his breastplate, then charged forward without slowing. Karsk fired his bolt pistol into the nearest rank of enthralled soldiers. The shells detonated inside bodies and turned torsos into fountains of meat, armor shards, and bone splinters. His sword came free in a white arc, cutting through a sergeant from shoulder to hip. The man's mouth continued speaking as his halves fell apart. "We are one. We are command. We are the end of your burden." "Silence," Karsk snarled, and crushed the head beneath his boot. The Black Templars advanced. They did not form a firing line and trade volleys like mortal infantry. They moved like a black iron tide, bolters roaring at close range, chainswords howling, flamers washing the packed masses in sanctified promethium. Civilians rose as one and rushed them with knives, tools, teeth, and bare hands. Their faces were twisted not by hatred, but by terror trapped behind obedience. Some screamed their own names beneath the alien voice. Some begged to be killed. Others smiled with another mind's malice. The Templars gave them fire. Promethium rolled across the plaza. Robes ignited. Skin blackened, split, and sloughed away. The screaming became physical, a pressure against the helm vox, but the warriors pushed through it. A flamer-bearer swept his weapon across a mound of bodies climbing over a rhino wreck, turning the mass into a thrashing pyre. Wrath leapt through the flames, tabard burning at the edge, chainsword raised in both hands. "Abhor the witch," he roared. His squad answered in the charge. "Destroy the witch." They hit the planetary defense line with chain blades screaming. Wrath's first blow took a Lasman's arm, shoulder, and half his skull in a wet burst that painted the warrior beside him. His second strike opened a captain from belly to throat, spilling coils of intestine across the scorched plaza. The captain clutched at the wound, lips still moving. The corpse signal dims, the stolen voice whispered. Wrath drove the chainsword through his mouth and out the back of his skull. "The Emperor is not a signal," Wrath said. "He is judgment." At the cathedral steps, the priests began to sing. The sound tore through mortal ears. Armsmen collapsed, clawing at their helmets as blood poured from their noses. Servo skulls dropped from the air. Even the Templars felt it, a grinding pressure inside the skull, as if hooks had caught behind the eyes and begun to pull. Karsk pointed his blade toward the cathedral doors. "Forward, no cover, no pause. Take the throat." A storm of fire met them on the steps. Heavy bolters mounted inside reliquary alcoves opened up, crewed by servitors whose spines had been nailed to weapon rigs. Autocannon shells punched craters in armor and pulped mortal soldiers behind the Templars. One initiate took a shell through the abdomen and fell, his lower body gone in a red ruin. He dragged himself forward by one hand until a chaplain behind him placed a boot on his back and fired over him into the enemy. "Crawl toward the foe, brother," the chaplain voxed. "Die in the correct direction." The initiate laughed once through blood and obeyed. Thunderhawks screamed overhead, blasting the cathedral facade with rockets. Stone saints exploded. Brass antennae snapped and fell among the defenders, crushing men into paste beneath sacred rubble. A land raider ground through the plaza, Lascannons firing, its assault ramp dropping even before it stopped. Sword brethren stormed out beneath the guns, power weapons crackling. Karsk reached the cathedral doors first. They were sealed with chains made from human spinal columns coated in metal. He looked at them for less than a heartbeat. "Melter." A warrior stepped forward and placed the charge. The blast turned the lock mass into white fire. Doors that had stood for centuries blew inward, and the Black Templars entered the house of St. Ulvorn with bolters raised. Inside, the cathedral had been inverted into blasphemy. The nave stretched into smoky darkness, its arches ribbed with cables and wet tubing. The pews had been removed, replaced by surgical racks and chanting bodies. The statues of saints had been drilled through the skull and wired into transmission pillars. Servo arms moved in the gloom, tending exposed brains suspended in amniotic fluids. The altar at the far end was gone. In its place stood a great vat of preserved grey matter, thousands of brains floating in alchemical murk, each one connected by brass wire to a pulsing central column. Every brain twitched as the Templars entered. Every corpse mouth in the chamber opened. The corpse on terror cannot hear you. The Cacodominus spoke through priests, soldiers, servitors, civilians, and the dead whose lungs had been mechanically forced to move. Its voice came from every arch and throat. The Imperium is a carrion machine. Its gears are famine. Its oil is blood. Its throne is a grave pretending to command. Morkant's voice thundered through the assault vox from somewhere outside, carried by relay. Do not answer the witch with debate. Answer with destruction. Wrath's squad advanced down the left aisle. They fired as they moved, bolt shells bursting skulls, chests, and wired organs. Cask drove straight for the altar vat with his command brethren. Thralls dropped from the arches on chains, bodies stitched with blades and augmetic claws. One landed on a Templar's back and drove a spike through the neck seal before being ripped away and torn in half by two sword brethren. Another exploded as a living bomb, showering the aisle in bone needles and steaming meat. The cathedral itself fought. Vox pipes emitted shrieks that cracked stone. Servo arms lashed from the walls. Hidden guns spat fire from confession alcoves. The exposed brains in the vat pulsed brighter, and for a moment, the entire assault force heard their own voices ordering them to kneel. One mortal attached to the breach team obeyed. He placed his laser gun under his chin and fired. No Templar knelt. Cask reached the altar platform amid a rain of blood and plaster. A priest with his skull opened like a flower stepped before him, arms outstretched, eyes rolled white. Little knives pretending to be saints, the alien said through him. You cut flesh and call it faith. Cask seized the priest by the throat. A knife is enough for a throat. He threw the priest into Wrath's path. Wrath's chainsword took him apart before he hit the floor. The vat's psychic. Pressure intensified. The central column began to open, revealing a knot of nerve cable and brass spheres beating like a heart. The brains chanted in wet unison. I rule the prayer. I rule the blood. I rule the species. Cask planted crack charges along the base. Wrath and the surviving sword brethren formed a ring around him, firing into the incoming masses. Thralls came without fear, climbing over their own dead, slipping in blood, reaching with broken fingers. Bolters detonated them by the dozen. A flamer turned the right aisle into a furnace. Power swords cut bright paths through flesh. The cathedral floor became a lake of blood, brain matter, spent casings, burning cloth, and shattered teeth. Charges set, Cask voxed. Withdraw, Serevan ordered from orbit. Cask looked at the vat. The brains inside shuddered as if laughing. Not far. He triggered the detonator. The altar vanished in white flame. The blast hurled Templars from their feet and tore the far end of the cathedral open to the burning sky. The vat ruptured, spraying preserved brains, chemical fluid, and brass wiring across the nave in a boiling wave. The psychic pressure snapped like a cable under strain. Every enthralled body within the cathedral screamed with its own voice for one terrible second before collapsing. Outside, the plaza fell silent, except for fire and the crackle of cooling weapons. Malachor Tertius shuddered beneath them. Across the world, several great broadcast spires went dark. In the strategium of the Judgment of Dawn, red enemy signals flickered and died across the planetary display. A cheer rose from mortal crew pits, quickly strangled into reverent silence under the gaze of Templar officers. Marshal Serevan watched the map. More signals appeared beyond Malachor. Hundreds of them, then more. The destroyed cathedral had not been the source. It had not even been the heart of Malachor Tertius. It was one node among many, a single nerve clipped from a body stretched across the stars. The Cacodominus had let them burn one throat so it could learn how their hands moved. The vox opened without authorization. This time the alien voice came softly, almost fondly, through the dead channels of the burning world. Good, it whispered. Now I know the shape of your hate." On the cathedral floor, Castellan Cask stood amid the ruin of the altar, armor painted with blood and brain fluid, sword still burning with power field light. Sword Brother Wrath looked toward the broken roof, where the sky itself seemed to pulse with distant laughter. "Then it will know the shape of its death," he said. But beneath his words, through every fading vox line on Malachor Tertius, the same sound began again, the howl of a mind too vast to fit inside one world. The war did not remain upon Malachor Tertius. It spread, as all true wars of the Imperium spread, by fire, by hunger, by order, and by the patient grinding of fleets through regions of space that no longer obeyed sane navigation. World after world was entered under lance bombardment and stormed beneath black banners. Some were shrine moons whose bells rang without hands. Some were manufactorum planets where every worker still stood at his station, feeding shells into assembly lines, while his mouth whispered alien commands. Some were void stations that opened docking arms in welcome and then detonated their plasma hearts when Imperial vessels came close. The Black Templars learned with every victory that they were not fighting an empire as men understood empire. They were fighting a nervous system stretched across the stars. Each world was a nerve. Each captured ship was a blood cell. Each astropathic choir was a diseased organ. Each enslaved population was a mouth through which the same will could pray, beg, threaten, and laugh. At Darnak's choir, the Imperial Navy broke 7 orbital bastions in a bombardment that turned the planet's upper atmosphere into burning iron rain. Beneath that rain, millions of armsmen and soldiers landed in ash, killed their way through Hab districts, and found the planetary governor seated upon a throne of fused clerks, still issuing decrees in a calm voice, while his own eyes bled down his cheeks. He thanked the Emperor for rescue as he ordered his palace guns to fire on the relief columns. Castellan Cask put a bolt through his heart. The governor died smiling with a mouth that was not his. At Pelagos Minor, a Mechanicus cohort retook a data shrine by sending automata through a pilgrim crowd packed shoulder to shoulder across the approach bridge. The pilgrims did not flee. They opened their robes to reveal demolition charges stitched into their ribs. The bridge vanished beneath a flower of white flame, taking 300 mortal soldiers, 40 servitors, and 2 sacred engines with it. The Cacodominus spoke from the smoke, through 1,000 severed heads rolling in the dust. At St. Oricon's wake, the enthralled population had climbed into vox towers and wired themselves together with copper hooks, nerve cords, and wet lengths of their own gut. When the Templars cut them down, the towers screamed in voices that sounded almost grateful. Still, the crusade advanced. It advanced by subtraction. 1 node silenced, 1 relay burned, 1 ship broken, 1 choir put to flame. Behind every victory lay fields of the dead so thick that tanks lost traction upon the slurry of torn bodies. Behind every liberation lay citizens who had awakened just long enough to understand what their hands had done. Some begged for mercy. Some asked to be shot. Many were granted both with a single shell. Marshal Odo Serevan studied the expanding pattern in the strategium of the Judgment of Dawn and saw the logic beneath the horror. The Xenos did not hold each world with equal pressure. It pulsed through them. It reinforced those under attack. It sacrificed some to protect others. It used planetary populations as shields, weapons, and augurs. It let entire garrisons die to learn the timing of a Black Templar's assault. Reclusiarch Morkant called such analysis useful only if it ended in fire. "The witch measures us," he said, standing beside the hololithic map while dead worlds turned slowly in red light. "Then we give it false measure," Serevan replied. "Hatred needs no disguise. Hatred without discipline is ammunition for the enemy." Morkant's skull helm turned toward him. "Discipline without hatred is cowardice clothed as prudence." Before the marshal could answer, the map flickered. One moon swelled in projection until its ash-grey surface filled the strategium. Gethsemar, a mining moon stripped almost to the bone, circling a gas giant the color of old bruises. Its plains were dead silica dust. Its mountains were slag ridges. Its cities were half-buried extraction engines, drill temples, hab warrens, and bunker lines. It had been retaken 3 days prior by imperial count, though the word retaken had become increasingly uncertain in the Cacodominus War. Now its northern armored column had gone silent. Then its second line vanished. Then the third began transmitting screams. The picked feed resolved in broken fragments. A giant walked through the ash. It was a knight, but not as loyal knights appeared in noble marches, heraldry bright, banners proud, thrones guarded by oaths older than many worlds. This engine had been remade into something funereal. Its carapace was blackened and scraped bare. Its household sigils had been gouged out and replaced with a crown of wire and bone. Chains hung from its shoulders, each one bearing corpses in noble pilot suits. Its faceplate had been painted with streaks of ash like tears. Its thermal cannon glowed white in one arm. Its Reaper chainsword hung from the other, teeth moving slowly, wetly, although no flesh yet touched them. The Mourning Tyrant, one of the 17 iron apostates. The name came through intercepted enemy traffic, though no sane herald had spoken it. The Cacodominus named its stolen giants as if appointing saints to a dead religion. Each had been given a duty. One burned forged shrines, one hunted astropathic sanctums, one crushed evacuation columns, one stood guard over a relay moon and killed every ship that approached. The Mourning Tyrant had been made executioner of armored hope. Wherever imperial steel gathered, it came walking. On Gethsemar, a black Templars land raider fired both Godhammerless cannons into the knight's chest. The beams struck void shields and burst into furious light. A second land raider advanced beside it, assault ramp sealed, multi-melter seeking a lock. The Mourning Tyrant turned. Its thermal cannon fired. The first land raider ceased to be a tank and became a sun-bright wound in the ash. Its front armor melted inward. Its ammunition cooked. The brothers within died as black silhouettes inside white fire. The second vehicle tried to turn, but the beams swept across it, slicing through adamantine, promethium tanks, engine block, and crew compartment. Molten metal spilled into the dust with bodies inside it, still burning beneath the armor. The knight's chainsword roared. Ancient brother Talmor, interred within his dreadnought sarcophagus for 6 centuries of crusade war, strode to meet it. His assault cannon spun and screamed, hammering shells into the knight's failing shield. His power fist crackled. His vox emitted a war hymn older than the ship that had carried him. The Mourning Tyrant stepped through the fire and brought the Reaper blade down. The chain blade struck Talmor from shoulder to hip, tore through sarcophagus plate, sacred seals, oil lines, and the withered hero sealed within. The dreadnought opened like a reliquary smashed by a god. Amniotic fluid, machine oil, shredded organs, and strips of ancient flesh sprayed across the ash. Talmor's last vox burst was not a cry. It was the first verse of a battle psalm cut in half. "Bring it down," Serevan ordered. The response came in layers. Vindicators crawled from the dust banks and fired siege shells into the Mourning Tyrant's left flank. The first shell burst against void shielding. The second overloaded it in a flash of blue fire. The third struck armor and punched inward, blowing a crater through the carapace and scattering fragments of blackened plating across the battlefield. Lascanon teams fired from ridge emplacements, beams converging on knee joints, weapon mounts, and sensor clusters. Melter squads hidden in trench cuts waited until the knight strode above them, then rose into its shadow and fired upward into the belly plates. The knight staggered. Thunderhawks descended from the poisoned sky, engines screaming, heavy bolters chewing across the carapace, while Lascanons speared the exposed reactor vents. One gunship flew too close. The Mourning Tyrant's thermal cannon snapped up, and caught it through the fuselage. The Thunderhawk burst apart, wings shearing away, troop compartment opening to the wind. Burning Templars fell from it like black meteors, some already dead, some still firing as they plunged. Teleport flares ignited around the knight's rear arc. Sword brethren in Terminator plate appeared in a circle of crackling light, thunder hammers raised, storm shields locked. They charged immediately, not toward safety, not toward cover, but toward the god machine's ankles. One was crushed beneath a backward step, his armor bursting under the weight, blood and bone forced out through cracked joints. Another drove his hammer into the knee assembly with enough force to shatter pistons the size of columns. A third was caught by a sweep of the Reaper chainsword and ripped in half, torso spinning away in sparks and blood. Still they struck, still they sang. Reclusiarch Morkant landed at the second defensive line in a Thunderhawk that touched down amid shellfire and corpses. He descended the ramp before it fully lowered, Crozius blazing, skull-helm lifted toward the towering apostate. "Stand!" he commanded over the field vox. Mortal soldiers were running, some were weeping, some had thrown down weapons after seeing the dreadnought butchered. Others had begun speaking in the alien's voice, repeating that the giant could not be slain, that iron itself had chosen its master. Morkant walked through them. A soldier turned his lasgun toward the chaplain, mouth open with words not his own. Morkant crushed the man's skull with the Crozius and kept walking. "Stand," he said again. Around him, Black Templars formed a new line among the wrecks. The morning tyrant broke through the third defense, feet grinding tanks, men, and broken guns into the ash. Its vox emitters opened. Two voices came from it. One was deep, cold, and immeasurably far away. The other was human and screaming underneath. "Help me," said the human voice. "Kneel," said the other. "Kill me. Obey. I was Sir Albrecht of House Vaughan. You are my hand. My sons, by the throne, my sons, I cannot stop. You are command-given armor." Morkant lifted his Crozius high. Its power field burned like a trapped star. "Brothers, the apostate begs for death. Let us not deny him." The chant rose around him as bodies were crushed beneath the knight's feet. "Abhor the witch!" A vindicator exploded, showering the line with molten armor. "Destroy the witch!" The morning tyrant's chainsword cut through a rhino and hurled the wreck aside. "Suffer not the unclean." Thunderhammers struck again at the damaged knee. "To live." Emperor's champion. Aldrich Thane came through the ash beneath the stride of the wounded giant. He had not waited for permission when the vision took him. He had seen the black skull again, but this time it wore the night as a mask. He had seen a pilot throne full of ghosts. He had heard noble oaths inverted into chains. The black sword was in his hands before the order reached him. By the time Seravan's command rune flashed on his helm display, Thane was already running. A melter charge blew open the knight's side carapace in a flower of orange fire. For a heartbeat, the rent exposed a ladder of structural ribs, cable bundles, and access gantries within the towering war engine. Thane leapt from a wrecked predator, caught the edge of the wound with one gauntlet, and hauled himself inside. The interior of the morning tyrant was a furnace of screaming metal. Heat rolled through cramped passages. Warning klaxons howled. Blood dripped from cables where blood had no place to be. The knight's throne chamber lay above, accessible through a shaft lined with twitching command cords. Thane climbed as the machine lurched beneath him. Every step of the giant shook the world. The Cacodominus spoke through the vox within the walls. "Champion," Thane climbed, "you enter a corpse and call it victory." He drove the black sword through a servo skull that dropped toward him with a needle drill. "I enter a prison," Thane said. The human voice sobbed through the speakers. "End it, end it, end it." The alien voice overrode him. "He is mine." Thane reached the throne chamber. There he found Sir Albrecht of House Vaughan, though little remained that deserved the shape of a noble pilot. The man was fused into the command throne by wire, bone staples, and black cables sunk into his spine. His eyes were open and aware. His mouth had been stitched around a vox grill. Behind him, the throne did not hold one mind, but generations. Ghost impressions clung to the neural manifold. Fathers, grandfathers, ancestral pilots, all fused into a psychic knot, all screaming orders from wars long ended, all now bent into the Cacodominus's leash. The air stank of cooked nerves and old blood. Sir Albrecht looked at Thane with eyes that were his own for one final second. "By the Emperor," the pilot whispered through the grill, "make me loyal in death." The Cacodominus answered with his mouth, "Touch him, and I shall wear your bones next." Thane stepped forward. The throne's defense arms unfolded. Needles stabbed. Circular saws shrieked. A claw raked across his breastplate, tearing away purity seals and scoring the armor of faith. He cut through the first arm, crushed the second beneath his boot, took a needle through the gorget, and felt poison hiss against his enhanced blood. He ignored it. "You are not here," Thane said to the alien. "Only your chain is." He raised the black sword. Sir Albrecht smiled through tears. "Then break it." Thane drove the blade through the pilot's heart and into the throne behind him. The scream that followed was not one man's death. It was the rending of a whole lineage of trapped echoes. The cockpit filled with pale light. Faces appeared in the steam, shouting, weeping, blessing, cursing. The knight staggered in the ash fields below. Its weapons spasmed. Its reaper chainsword bit into the ground and buried itself to the haft. The Cacodominus shrieked through the vox, not in pain, but in fury at denied possession. Thane tore the black sword free and struck again, severing the neural crown from the pilot's skull. Sir Albrecht died at once. The ghosts died with him. The throne went dark. Outside, the mourning tyrant collapsed. It fell slowly, like a fortress accepting execution. Its damaged knee buckled. Its carapace pitched forward. Templars and mortal soldiers scattered as the giant struck the ash moon and drove a shockwave across the battlefield, flattening men and throwing tanks sideways. Dust swallowed everything. When it cleared, Reclusiarch Morkant stood before the fallen knight, Crozius still raised. From the rent in the carapace, Emperor's champion Thane emerged covered in oil, blood, and throne fluid. He carried no trophy, only the black sword, still wet with the pilot's death. Morkant looked up at him. "The chain broke?" Thane nodded once. "Death breaks it." Magos Dominus Hesteron 9 arrived after the field was secured, borne upon a crawling platform of brass limbs and escorted by automata whose armor was pitted by shrapnel. The Magos entered the knight's opened carcass without reverence and extended mechadendrites into the dead command throne. Data sparks crawled over his bronze mask. His vox clicked and grated as he translated agony into useful pattern. Signal residue confirmed. The Dreadblade was not autonomous. It was a limb. Command impulse routed through relay sequence. Local node. Deep node. Core origin concealed by warp turbulence and dead navigation strata. Serevan stood beside the fallen knight, looking across the battlefield, where men gathered their dead in pieces. "Can you name the origin?" "Partial designation impossible. Directional certainty increasing. All nodes trend inward. Forbidden system cluster. Uncharted by current Imperial record. Route occluded. Choir access lethal." Morkant's Crozius struck the ash. "Then that is where the witch waits." Hesteron 9 withdrew his cables from the throne. Addendum. The alien permits loss for analysis. Recommend acceleration before adaptation renders current assault doctrine obsolete. Serevan looked toward Thane. The champion said nothing. He was staring at the dead knight, as if seeing beyond it, past Gethsemar, past Malachor, past the broken relay worlds, toward the skull that filled his visions. The marshal opened the crusade vox. All forces prepare for redeployment. Gethsemar is cleansed enough to abandon. The order had barely passed when every manufactorum siren on the moon began to sound. At first, the commanders thought it was another attack. Then orbital pict feeds showed the truth. Across the recaptured southern hemisphere, the enslaved population began walking, not toward bunkers, not toward guns, not toward the imperial lines, toward the industrial furnaces. Men left Hab shelters in endless columns. Mine workers, clerks, wounded soldiers, ash farmers, medici orderlies, chained prisoners, all moving with the same pace beneath the same invisible hand. Black Templars patrols opened fire into the crowds. Commissars shouted halt orders. Priests screamed prayers. Nothing stopped them. Millions marched into the furnace mouths of the ore refineries, stepping over those shot before them, pushing forward until the conveyor bridges were slick with blood and crushed limbs. The furnaces accepted them. Bodies vanished into white heat by the thousands. The moon's chimneys vomited greasy black smoke into the sky. Vox channels filled with human voices speaking one final sentence in perfect unison. This is the price of touching what is mine. On the bridge of the Judgment of Dawn, no one spoke. Then Marshal Serevan closed his fist. Set course for the next node. Reclusiarch Morkant bowed his skull helm. No mercy can outrun this. No, said Serevan, only death can catch it. And far away, beyond the broken roots and the warp-drowned dark, the Cacodominus laughed with the mouths of burning worlds. Varadon Secundus did not burn when the crusade arrived. That was the first obscenity. From orbit, the hive world looked almost peaceful beneath its shroud of industrial filth. Its continents were hidden by cloud belts, the color of old bruises. Its oceans were black with runoff and corpse ash. Its hive stacks rose above the poison weather in tiered mountains of plasteel, stonecrete, rusted iron, and devotional bronze. Shrine lights still burned along the upper spires. Manufactorum smoke still climbed from the furnace districts. Transit arteries still pulsed with cargo crawlers and pilgrim trains. Millions of lumen windows glowed in patterns too regular to be natural, as if the whole world breathed according to a rhythm imposed from beyond itself. It was not a dead world. It was worse. It was obedient. Marshal Odo Serevan stood upon the command dais of the Judgment of Dawn and watched the orbital picts resolve into detail. The hives had not rioted. They had not collapsed into open revolt. There were no mass fires, no planetary pleas, no rebel banners daubed across command bastions. Work shifts moved. Bell towers rang. Tithe barges continued to rise from the equatorial freight fields. Vox relays chattered with shipping tallies, food allotment notices, corpse reclamation figures, labor rotations, and public prayers to the Emperor in perfect devotional cadence. Every system appeared loyal. Every voice was wrong. The astropathic sanctum reported the same pressure that had haunted the fleet since Malachor Tertius, though here it came muted, submerged beneath the surface of routine. Choir serfs bled from the nose as they transcribed incoming planetary liturgies. The words were imperial. The rhythm was not. They bowed in the wrong places. They praised with the wrong pauses. They confessed obedience to the master of mankind, with the dead precision of a machine repeating a thing it had studied but never believed. Reclusiarch Severian Morkant stood beside the marshal, skull helm angled toward the world below. It has learned reverence well enough to mock it. Serevan's gauntleted hand rested upon the rail, or well enough to hide within it. That is the same sin wearing another mask. The first wave descended under full war protocol. Thunderhawks and storm ravens punched through the chemical clouds with escorts howling in formation. Drop pods followed, black meteors wrapped in fire. Beneath them, the upper hive of Varadon Primus opened no guns. No flak reached up. No defense lasers fired. The landing fields cleared their traffic lanes. Servo towers blinked safe approach codes. Cathedral bells rang from 1,000 steeples. When the Black Templars hit the ground, the people knelt. Workers in ash-stained coveralls lowered themselves beside conveyor roads, their hands folded over grease and scar tissue. Factorum overseers knelt with shock mauls still hanging from their belts. Administratum clerks bowed in neat rows upon the steps of record temples. Corpse guild haulers halted their carts and bent their heads while the dead lay stacked behind them like cordwood. Children in labor smocks recited the catechism of service in clear voices, each syllable sharp, each breath timed with the bells above. Priests rang handbells before roadside shrines and cried blessings upon the warriors of the Emperor. The Black Templars advanced through them with bolters raised. No one fled, no one resisted, no one blinked out of time. Castellan Bors Karsk walked at the head of the first armored spearhead, land raiders grinding behind him, rhinos rolling between columns of kneeling civilians. Mortal armsmen followed in nervous ranks, laser guns held tight, eyes darting from face to face. Many of them had expected screaming mobs, barricades, gun nests, blood signs, something they could understand as war. This was worse than war. A boy no older than a manufacturer apprentice looked up at Karsk and smiled with an old thing's patience. "The Emperor protects," the child said. Karsk stopped. The entire avenue stopped. Every kneeling worker, priest, clerk, hauler, child, and corpse handler turned his face upward at the same moment, their mouths opened together. "You cannot save what I have already worn." The bells ceased. Then the hive exhaled violence. Workers rose with cutting torches. Children drew skinning blades from devotional satchels. Priests hurled censers packed with detonation charges. Administratum scribes opened their robes to reveal las pistols and butcher hooks. From the hab balconies above, heavy stubbers clattered from behind prayer banners. Mortals in imperial service screamed as the crowd surged around them, clawing, stabbing, biting, striking with tools and bare hands. The Black Templars answered as their vows demanded. Bolters thundered at street distance. Bodies came apart in wet bursts, limbs spinning, chests opening, skulls vanishing into sprays of bone and brain. Karsk fired into a knot of charging laborers until they collapsed in overlapping heaps, then drew his power sword and cut down a priest whose bell hammer had become a hooked axe. Rhinos slewed sideways and opened their side hatches. Initiates poured out, chainswords screaming awake. Prometheum jets washed across the lower hab frontage, turning balconies into shrines of fire. Men tumbled from windows with their robes burning and their mouths still speaking the aliens' words. Selective purgation, Serevan ordered over the war net from orbit. Command centers, Vox nodes, Psyker pens, military districts. Sever the signal architecture before the population mass is fully weaponized. Morkan's voice cut in like a blade dragged over bone. Broaden the cleansing. Every body left standing is a weapon waiting to be lifted. We do not have munitions enough to burn a hive world from the foundations. We have faith enough. We require victory, Reclusiarch, not ash alone. Hesitation is how witches build kingdoms. On the ground, the distinction became harder with every street. Imperial Guard regiments assigned to perimeter control suffered first and worst. They had been trained to hold lines against rebels, raiders, and Xenos beasts. They had not been trained to hear their dead brothers call them by childhood names from Vox grills. They had not been trained for an enemy that could enter the skull through a hymn remembered from boyhood. A platoon from the 9th Brontian locked shields across a market square as civilians pressed toward them in slow silence. Their lieutenant raised a hand to fire warning shots and suddenly turned his pistol upon his own command squad. He killed 3 men before a Templar initiate crushed his arm and broke his neck with a single blow. Another squad began firing into each other after the Vox on their backs whispered coordinates in the voices of their mothers. Navy armsmen aboard a descending assault lighter clawed open their own harnesses during landing, beat the pilot to death, and crashed into a pilgrim dormitory, spreading burning fuel across 4 streets. Some mortals retained enough of themselves to understand the coming seizure. A grey-faced sergeant crawled towards Sword Brother Gideon Wrath, with both legs ruined by shrapnel, dragging a lasgun behind him by its sling. "My lord," he gasped, "it comes and goes. I can feel it. Throne. I can feel it looking for me." Wrath looked down at him. "Name your loyalty." "The Emperor," the sergeant sobbed. "The Emperor, the Emperor, the Emperor. Kill me before it comes back." His eyes rolled white. His mouth began to smile. Wrath fired once. The bolt shell took the man through the forehead and burst the back of his skull across the street stones. "Loyalty confirmed," Wrath said, and moved on. The cruelty of the Black Templars became the only mercy that functioned. When Hab Block Penitent 12 turned its entire population into a descending human flood, Karsk ordered the stair cores sealed and burned. Men hammered from inside. Children screamed prayers. Mothers beat bloody hands against blast shutters. Then the upper levels opened their windows and began lowering corpse bombs on cables toward the Templar armor below. The flamers went in through the ventilation stacks. The block became a furnace. The screaming lasted 9 minutes. The enemy guns fell silent. When the Magistratum Command Precinct began transmitting retreat orders in Marshal Seravan's voice, the Marshal himself ordered orbital macro fire upon it. A lance strike speared through the precinct tower and turned its upper half into incandescent dust. Every officer inside died with their hands still moving over command tablets. When a pilgrim district began chanting in harmonic unison and mortal soldiers dropped bleeding from eyes and ears, Morkant sealed the gates with melter slag and had vindicators collapse the surrounding avenues. The district remained alive for hours beneath the rubble, still singing. By dawn, nothing moved there except smoke. Sword Brother Wrath was sent into the Medici Hive. It had once been the mercy quarter of Varadon Primus, a stacked labyrinth of chirurgeon houses, plague wards, casualty manufactoria, corpse reclamation halls, and sanctified hospitals, where the injured poor were patched well enough to return to work. Its towers were white beneath the grime, marked with red aquilae and caduceus icons. Now they pulsed with a psychic rhythm strong enough to make Auspex needles bend. Wrath entered with 2 squads, a flamer team, and a detachment of Mechanicus Auspex servitors whose flesh components had been cut down to the minimum. The doors of the first triage basilica opened for them without resistance. Inside, the surgeons still worked. They stood in blood-slick robes beside operating slabs, hands moving with impossible precision. Patients lay open from throat to pelvis, organs pinned outward, lungs breathing through glass tubes. Corpse servitors moved between tables, carrying trays of extracted eyes, tongues, spinal cords, and still twitching brains. The walls had been stripped of plaster to reveal conduits beneath, but the conduits were not wires. They were nerves, miles of them. Human nerves braided with copper, stitched through support columns, running upward into the hive's Medici spire. A surgeon turned from a table and bowed. "Wounds are doors," he said in the voice of the Cacodominus. "Pain makes excellent architecture." Wrath shot him through the chest. The surgeon fell, but his hands kept moving, fingers stitching air. The Medici hive woke. Patients rose from slabs with their rib cages open. Corpse servitors unfolded bone saws and needle injectors. Limbless men dragged themselves from recovery pits with scalpels held between their teeth. A ceiling rail came alive with hanging bodies, each one wired through the skull, mouths opening in sequence to form a choir. Their song was not sound alone. It pressed on memory, pulled at old grief, searched for pity, and twisted it toward surrender. "Burn it," Wrath ordered. The flamer team advanced. Promethium filled the ward. Open bodies ignited. Fat popped. Surgical spirits exploded in blue flares. A patient with his abdomen emptied crawled through the fire and clutched Wrath's greave, looking up with pleading human eyes. "Please," the man whispered. Then the alien found his tongue. "Rule them," it said. Wrath brought his boot down on the man's head and crushed it against the tiles. Emperor's champion. Aldrich Thane heard the same words 3 districts away. He stood in the ruins of a command chapel, surrounded by dead militia officers whose throats had been cut to silence the vox prayers issuing from them. The black sword rested in his hand. Every corpse around him had spoken his name before death. Not Aldrich, not Thane, champion. The voice came through the chapel walls, through the blood in the mortar, through the dying pulse of the hive. Rule them. Do not save them. Rule them better than I. Thane turned slowly. There was no body to strike. The Cacodominus spoke again, low and intimate. They desire command. They build thrones for corpses and call it freedom. They kneel to masters and name obedience faith. I do not lie to them. I only remove the pain of choosing. Thane's fingers tightened around the black sword. You mistake slavery for order. I perfect what your Imperium began. Thane stepped through the chapel's broken arch. Outside, a crowd of enthralled civilians waited in the street, thousands strong, unarmed, kneeling in rows. Every face looked at him. Every mouth smiled. Take them, the Xenos whispered. They already understand the shape of command. Wear them in his name. Rule them better than I. Reclusiarch Morkant arrived through smoke and ash, Crozius in hand. He saw the crowd. He saw the champion standing before them like a blade held above a throat. What did it offer? Morkant asked. Dominion. Then it fears your obedience more than your hatred. Thane did not look at him. They are alive. They are occupied territory. They breathe. So does a plague lung. The crowd began to speak again, but Morkant raised his Crozius, and the Templars behind him opened fire. Bolter shells tore through the kneeling masses. Bodies jerked and burst. Blood sheeted across the street. The front ranks fell, then the next, then the next, each man dying with another Will's smile stretched across his face. Thane stood unmoving as the slaughter continued. Morkant leaned close. Pity is the door by which witches enter the soul. Bar it, nail it shut, set a gun before it. The Emperor demands more than butchery. The Emperor demands victory. Mercy given to a weapon is treason against its next victim. By the second day, Magos Dominus Hesteron 9 had enough data. The conclusion came from Auspec's ghosts, recovered choir implants, captured vox organs, and the remains of the Medicae antenna after Wrath squads had burned their way to its central nerve trunk. The Cacodominus did not hold every mind at full strength without support. It pulsed through relay architecture. It required choirs, cybernetic amplifiers, signal towers, pain harmonics, and sacrificial population centers. Where the architecture was broken, the grip weakened. Where enough death silenced enough mouths, the command faltered. Hesteron 9 delivered the finding to Serevan inside a half-collapsed tithe basilica, while shell dust rained from the ceiling. Conclusion: the enemy is vast but not infinite. Domination strength degrades with distance from relay mass. Primary hive spire contains composite signal node, astropathic remnants, vox choir, cybernetic amplification, population resonance chambers, destroy spire, local command fracture probable, collateral mortality extreme. Serevan looked through the basilica's broken windows toward the central spire of Varadon Primus. It pierced the clouds like a spear of black stone and bronze, covered in cathedrals, landing platforms, noble keeps, data chapels, and transmission thorns. Millions lived within it. Millions more were cabled into its lower strata by necessity, labor, poverty, or now the will of the Xenos. Morkant stood behind him. You know the answer. Serevan did. Cyclonic demolition charges were carried into the spire's foundation levels by Templar breacher teams, Mechanicus automata, and mortal engineers who knew they would not return. The fighting below was blind, close, and filthy. Men drowned in sewage canals while firing upward at thralls crawling across the ceiling. Templars hacked through corridors, packed so tight with bodies that chainswords jammed on bone. Automata marched until buried under human waves, then detonated their own reactors. One by one, the charges were armed. At the surface, the hive population screamed, not from fear, from command. Every living body in the central districts turned toward the spire and began running to protect it. They came in rivers of flesh, trampling their own dead, climbing over barricades, hurling themselves into bolter fire until streets clogged waist-deep with bodies. Land raiders fired until barrels glowed. Vindicators collapsed avenues. Flamers made daylight beneath the poisoned sky. The final charge rune turned green. Marshal Serevan gave the word. The heart of Varadon Primus became light. For several seconds, the central spire held its shape, burning from within. Then cracks opened along its height, brilliant and widening. Cathedral tiers broke away. Noble keeps slid into the abyss. Transmission needles snapped and fell like spears thrown by dying gods. The foundation shock rolled outward through the hive, flattening districts, rupturing tunnels, throwing millions into darkness beneath descending stone. The spire collapsed in upon itself with the sound of a world choking. The psychic scream vanished. In its absence came something worse. Individual voices, men waking under rubble, soldiers sobbing in the streets, priests begging forgiveness, children calling for fathers who would never answer. The entire hive moaned with the sudden return of stolen selves and the immediate knowledge of ruin. The Black Templars knelt in the ash, not to mourn, not to repent. They knelt facing the fallen spire while smoke climbed into the poisoned heavens, and Reclusiarch Morcant led them in thanksgiving that the dead could no longer be used. Emperor's champion. Thane remained standing. Far away, beneath the rubble of a murdered city, the Cacodominus whispered through one last dying mouth. "Better," it said. "You are learning." The road inward was not a route so much as a wound. Beyond Varadon Secundus, the charts ceased to behave like instruments of imperial reason. Star positions shifted between augur sweeps. Warp translation points appeared upon one survey and vanished upon the next. Old pilgrimage lanes led into gravitic deadfalls. Navy cartographs bled corrupted coordinates into their own margins, parchment curling as if burned by unseen fingers. Every sanctioned route toward the Catalexis depths had been drowned beneath a psychic shadow vast enough to bend the Astronomican's light around it. The navigators saw it first and named it with no word their houses would later admit to possessing. A darkness in the golden beacon, not absence. Absence would have been cleaner. This was distortion, the Emperor's distant radiance twisted across the immaterium by the swollen presence of the Xenos tyrant. It did not eclipse the light of terror, for nothing born beneath stars could do such a thing and remain. It warped perception of it. It made the path seem near when it was far, straight when it curved, safe when it opened into storms, filled with demonic hunger and broken time. In the navigator towers of the Crusade fleet, sealed behind adamantium shutters and prayer locks, the mutant scions of ancient houses screamed warnings through cracked teeth. Some emerged from trance with their eyes turned black and their lips moving in the rhythm of the Cacodominus. Those were executed before their second breath. Others clawed warding circles into their own skin and begged for more incense, more chains, more hymns, more anything to keep the alien shadow from touching the place behind their sight. In the astropathic sanctums, the deaths grew faster. Some astropaths burned quietly, slumping in their thrones with smoke leaking from nostrils and ear canals, their blind faces serene beneath the final mercy of sudden overload. Others became conduits, their spines arched until vertebrae snapped, their mouths opened wider than human flesh should allow. They transmitted fragments of enemy cant, threat, map, mockery, and memory through throats ruined by blood. One spoke for 9 minutes after his heart had been removed by an apothecary's blade. Another repeated the name Aldrich Thane until his tongue tore free and fell into his lap. The Black Templars despised the witch. They did not pretend otherwise. They did not soften the word for comfort. They had sworn against the unclean power of the warp and those who wielded it. Yet sanctioned astropaths were also servants of the Imperium, blinded, bound, soul-scarred, and chained to duty beneath the Emperor's authority. Their suffering was not merely tragic, it was strategic ruin. Every dead choir narrowed the Crusades' reach. Every burned mine dimmed communication between ships. Every screaming conduit risked turning a vessel into another mouth of the alien. Marshal Odo Serevan ordered triple guard upon every astropathic chamber. No psyker was to be approached without a chaplain, an apothecary, and an executioner present. Mercy shots were authorized without appeal. Burning was preferred if the body continued to speak after death. Reclusiarch Severian Morcant approved with the cold finality of a tomb door. "Let no witch die unguarded," he said over the fleet command vox. "Even useful fire may spread corruption if left untended." Magos Dominus Hesteron. 9 came before the War Council aboard the Judgment of Dawn, with a solution made of metal, calculation, and contempt for frailty. His bronze mask reflected the hololithic map in fractured green light. Behind him, data servitors dragged chains of parchment and fiber cable, their mouths stitched shut to deny any voice that was not authorized. Organic navigation approaching functional collapse, the Magos grated. Choir attrition exceeds sustainable threshold. Navigator reliability degraded by psychic refraction. Recommendation: machine-led vanguard. Servitor piloted probes. Automata escorted mapping hulks. Dead route penetration in staggered sacrificial sequence. Pattern survival will define usable corridor. Castellan Boar's casque stood with arms folded across his scarred breastplate. "You propose sending machines ahead to die until the road is marked?" "Affirmative. And if the machines vanish? Then the crusade does not." Morcant's skull helm tilted toward the Magos. "Cold logic is a poor altar." Hesteron 9's mechadendrites clicked softly. "Correction. Logic is not altar. Logic is blade geometry. Faith determines target. Calculation determines whether edge reaches throat." Serevan stared at the corrupted display of the Catalexis depths. The suspected core lay beyond dead navigation strata, behind currents of warp turbulence that swallowed auger ghosts and spat back impossible echoes. Every node destroyed had pointed inward. Every relay burned had left residue leading toward the same black absence. The Cacodominus was not hiding now. It was making itself difficult to approach, forcing the Imperium to spend men, mines, and ships with every step. The Marshal nodded once. "Send the iron first." Thus began the Black Road. Servitor piloted probes translated into the dead routes and failed to return. Automata carriers followed, their crews reduced to lobotomized machine servants and command protocols sealed in adamantine data shrines. Some emerged hours later scarred by radiation and impossible frost. Others returned inside out, their hulls warped into shapes that made mortal observers vomit blood. One probe translated back with its outer plating, covered in human handprints from within, though no living crew had been aboard. Hesteron 9 recorded all outcomes, without comment, and refined the path. The Templars hated depending on such cold mechanism, but they accepted necessity. Faith needed a blade needed a hand needed a road to reach the throat. The enemy struck before the route could be completed. There was no warning, no auger bloom, no translation flare, until the captured Navy vessels were already among the rearward convoy elements, appearing from the warp, with shields raised and weapons hot. Their hulls bore the marks of the Imperial Navy, but the aquili upon their prows had been scratched open and filled with black wire. Their engine wakes stuttered with psychic interference. Their Vox identifiers transmitted hymns of loyalty through layers of wet static, while their broadsides turned upon troop transports and munition carriers. The lead attacker was the cruiser St. Drusus Burden. It had once served in the battle fleet guarding pilgrim lanes. Now, its bridge tower had been crowned with nerve antennae. Its crew decks pulsed with heat signatures fused into walls and command thrones. Its gun batteries fired in perfect rhythm with the heartbeat of something that was not aboard it, and yet ruled every deck. The St. Drusus Burden opened fire upon a mass conveyor carrying 3 regiments of mortal soldiers and siege engines. Macro shells struck the conveyor amidships. Its spine cracked. Compartments vented men into the void by the thousands. The soldiers died in silence beyond the glass, arms and legs thrashing as frost formed over faces still locked in prayer. Seravan gave the order before the wreck had finished breaking. "Board it! Break its choir! Kill whatever it uses as a heart!" Black Templars assault boats and boarding torpedoes launched from the Judgment of Dawn and its escorts. The void between ships became a storm of flak, debris, and fire. One boarding torpedo was caught by point defense and torn apart, spilling armored bodies and burning fuel into space. Another struck the cruiser's flank and failed to penetrate, crushed against void-hardened plating. Kask's assault ram punched through a gun deck amid a roar of impact alarms and buckling metal. The ramp blew outward. The Templars entered a slaughter tunnel. The gun deck of the St. Drusus Burden was a cathedral of ammunition hoists, loading arms, breech blocks, and chained men. Void crew had been stapled to bulkheads by their own ribs, mouths forced open by brass frames, throats connected to vox tubes. They were alive. Their eyes rolled as the Templars emerged. Every one of them spoke in sequence, forming the aliens' greeting. Little blades. Kask fired into the nearest wall of living speakers. Bolt shells punched through torsos, burst spines, and sprayed the bulkhead with red pulp. The crewmen sagged against their staples, dead at last. "Advance," Kask voxed. "Deck by deck. No prisoners while the ship speaks." The cruiser's corridors became red iron murder. Enthralled voidsmen charged with shotguns, boarding axes, lascutters, and their bare hands. They came from maintenance shafts and shrine alcoves, crawling over piping, dropping from ceiling gantries, advancing through bolter fire as if death were only an inconvenience to the will driving them. Many wore navy uniforms. Many were already dead, their bodies moving by crude augmetic impulse and psychic command, jaws hanging loose, eyes cooked white. Bolter fire filled the passageways with thunder. Shells detonated inside packed bodies, painting walls with meat, bone, and shredded cloth. Chain blades chewed through arms and necks, jamming only when too much rib and tendon clogged the teeth. Flamers purged entire crew barracks, where men had been wired into bunks and made to chant firing solutions. Promethium washed over them, and the chanting turned to a single rising scream before the oxygen burned away. Sword Brother Wrath led the leftward sweep through the lower munitions spine. He did not pause for cover when a charge could close the distance. His squad advanced beneath shotgun blasts, armor sparking, tabards torn, weapons chained tight to gauntlets slick with blood. A void officer came at him with a power saber in one hand and a devotional icon in the other, tears running down his face. "Forgive me," the officer said. Then the Cacodominus spoke through his mouth. "Bleed for my map." Wrath's chainsword met the saber in a shower of sparks. He slammed his helm into the officer's face, crushed the nose flat, then opened the man from collar to pelvis. Entrails poured steaming onto the deck. The officer fell to his knees, trying with his last strength to make the Aquila, before the alien seized his fingers and twisted them into a mockery of benediction. Wrath cut off the hand. "The Emperor saw the attempt," he said, and kept moving. Far above, Kask and his breachers fought toward the cruiser's central choir chamber. Auspec's ghosts indicated extreme psychic output beyond the old navigator vaults. The deeper they advanced, the stranger the ship became. Bulkheads sweated blood. Machine spirits stuttered. Lumen strips flickered in time with distant chanting. Dead servitors turned their heads after the Templars passed, tracking them without power. One corridor repeated itself 3 times until Morkant, arriving with a second wave, struck the wall with his Crozius and ordered the squad to walk through the false image. Ceramite met metal. The illusion shattered into vox static. They found the choir chamber behind 7 sealed blast doors and a barricade made from bodies bolted together. Melter charges opened the way. The chamber beyond was the cruiser's true heart. Astropaths hung from the ceiling in chains of silver wire, their skin flensed in careful strips, their blind heads crowned with conductor nails. Navigators had been dragged from their towers and nailed into iron frames, third eyes forced open by clamps and surrounded by rotating lenses. Choir pits overflowed with sanctioned psychers, ship officers, and machine-linked slaves, all kept alive by pumps and nutrient tubes. Their nerves fed into a central apparatus of brass, black stone, and wet organic cabling. The whole chamber pulsed with a rhythm that matched the distorted maps of the Catalexis core. The St. Drusus burden was not merely a captured cruiser, it was a mobile psychic organ. Karsk understood before the Magos confirmed it. "Charges," he ordered. The bound astropaths began to scream, not in one voice, in thousands, though far fewer bodies hung before the Templars. The chamber amplified them, multiplied them, threw them outward through the enemy network. Their mouths opened wide enough to split. Their ruined tongues shaped a single name. Aldrich Thane. Across the ship, across the fleet, across the burned relays and dead routes. The name rang. Aldrich Thane. On the Judgment of Dawn, the Emperor's champion halted in the launch chapel and looked up. Blood began to run from the purity seals on his armor, though no wound had opened. The black sword trembled in his grip. In the choir chamber, Karsk raised his pistol and began killing the bound psychers one by one, where the charges would not be fast enough. Bolts burst heads, caved ribs, ruptured support frames. Morkant entered behind him, Crozius blazing, and smashed the central apparatus with blow after blow while chanting damnation over the screaming. "Your suffering ends," the Reclusiarch thundered. "Your service is witnessed. Your bondage is broken by fire." The charges detonated. The St. Drusus burden screamed as its choir chamber came apart. Psychic backlash tore through the cruiser. Decks convulsed. Guns fell silent. Thousands of enthralled crew dropped where they stood, some dead, some awake and mad, some begging forgiveness into the blood-slicked decks. The boarding parties withdrew through collapsing corridors, while the cruiser rolled under the impact of renewed Imperial fire. From the bridge of the Judgment of Dawn, Serevan watched the corrupted ship break beneath lance strikes. Its reactor failed in stages, each explosion opening another section to the void. Bodies streamed from it in clouds. Then the St. Drusus burden vanished in a sunburst of plasma and bone dust. Victory cost them 3 escorts, a munition barge, 2 troop transports, and a third of the rearward convoy's mortal strength. The crusade continued. It had to. Entire troop convoys vanished in the warp along the Black Road, swallowed between one translation point and the next, without signal or wreckage. An escort squadron emerged from a probe corridor, broadcasting victory codes from a war not yet fought, its hulls aged by centuries, its crews reduced to dust, arranged neatly in command chairs. One pilgrim transport returned with every living crewman fused into the inner walls, faces stretched across metal like wax masks, mouths still opening and closing. Around prayers no sound carried. The campaign began eating itself. Fuel dwindled. Choirs died. Navigators raved. Mortal soldiers whispered of abandonment and damnation. Some ships requested permission to fall back and were denied. Others tried to change course under corrupted command and were destroyed by their own escorts. The Black Templars endured because endurance was beneath notice. They had not been promised survival. Morkant reminded the fleet of this. His sermon went out over every sanctioned vox, carried through static, flame, and the distant wet howling, that now haunted all frequencies. Servants of the throne, hear me. The Emperor did not promise us survival. He promised us duty. He did not command us to live cleanly, nor die gently, nor return with soft hands and unstained souls. He commanded mankind to endure beneath his light and kill that which would drag us into darkness. The witch has taken worlds. The witch has warned the faithful. The witch has made mockery of mercy. Therefore mercy shall be a blade, and duty shall be fire. Stand to your stations. Hold to your weapons. Pray while your blood remains warm. Die facing the foe, and your death will be counted as ammunition in the guns of his wrath. The words did not comfort the fleet. They hardened it. Men who had wept in weapon bays returned to loading shells. Armsmen who had whispered of ghosts locked their helms and checked their shotguns. Naval officers signed execution orders for compromised decks without trembling. Astropaths who could still speak asked to be chained tighter before the next translation. The crusade became less human with every mile, and therefore better fitted to the road it walked. At last the machine-led vanguard found the edge. Not the heart, not yet, but the boundary of the forbidden core system cluster. The surviving probes returned with hulls blackened and cogitators boiling. Hesteron 9 assembled their dying data into a map that looked like an infection in space. The Crusade fleet translated one final time before the core. Reality shuddered open. They emerged into a region where every star pulsed like a diseased heart. The void was dim and red, threaded with dust clouds that moved against solar wind. Dead ships drifted at the edge of Augur Range, some imperial, some unknown, all arranged in slow spirals as if drawn into orbit around a thought. No beacon answered, no world hailed them, no light shone clean. Then every vox channel filled with a distant sound, wet, mechanical, vast, a howl breathing through the bones of captured systems. On the bridge of the Judgment of Dawn, Marshal Serevan looked into the dark and knew the road had ended. Somewhere beyond it waited the throat. Somewhere beyond it waited the skull. And in the launch chapel, Aldrich Thane heard his name spoken by something older than mercy and colder than death. Catalexis Prime was not a world. It was an engine built from worlds. The Crusade fleet reached the outer dark beneath the failing light of poisoned stars and found no sane system waiting for them. The Auspex returns came back layered, fractured, and bleeding with false distance. Moons hung in orbit like execution platforms, their crusts opened and plated over with weapon cathedrals, lance silos, missile crypts, and defense bastions wired directly into screaming human choirs. Orbital rings circled the inner worlds in ragged bands made from wrecked ships, broken stations, pilgrim hulks, void docks, and the bones of fleets devoured across centuries of hidden war. Whole cruisers had been welded prow to stern into barricades. Frigate spines jutted from the ring like the ribs of dead leviathans. Cargo holds had been split open and stuffed with gun batteries. Chapel domes had been turned outward to house augur arrays that stared into the void with blinded astropaths nailed inside them. Beneath those rings, hive worlds turned in slow procession around the system's dying sun. Their cities were not merely occupied. They had been carved into instruments. Spires had been hollowed into resonance stacks. Hab blocks had been rearranged by demolition and forced labor into sigils too vast for ground-bound minds to understand. Pilgrim roads ran across continents in geometric scars, and upon those roads marched uncounted millions, their bodies keeping rhythm, their boots striking the earth in patterns that fed the psychic storm. Manufactoria no longer forged only shells, tanks, and engines. They forged sound. They forged pain. They forged obedience. The entire system howled below the threshold of hearing. On the bridge of the Judgment of Dawn, mortal crewmen bled through nose plugs and eye seals, while the Black Templars stood unmoving beneath the red gloom of the command vault. Servo skulls sparked and dropped from their tracks. Picked screens showed impossible angles, towers bending inward though they stood straight. defense moons seeming closer than ships, then farther, then inside the map. The machine spirits of the augur shrines fought to reconcile position with blasphemy and failed in showers of error parchment. Marshal Odo Serevan watched the inner system without speaking. Reclusiarch Severian Morkant stood beside him, one gauntlet clasped around his Crozius, skull helm fixed upon the largest signal mass. Even through armor, even through wards, even through the disciplined hatred of a soul hardened by war, he could feel it. Not fear, invitation. The Cacodominus did not hide at the center of Catalexis Prime. It enthroned itself there in obscene certainty, making a court of planets and a cathedral of enslaved star lanes. Magos Dominus Hesteron. 9 projected the core target above the command table. The image flickered, fought itself, then steadied into a shape that made several mortal officers recoil. A planetoid fortress drifted inside the innermost ring, half moon, half citadel, half corpse machine, though no proper geometry allowed such a sum. Its surface bristled with stolen imperial towers, Xenos pylons, gun decks, antenna forests, and spines of black iron. Great cables ran from the fortress into surrounding debris rings and down toward the nearest hive world, each cable thicker than a void ship, each one pulsing with wet internal movement. Suspended within the fortress, visible through a lattice of shielding fields and open structural wounds, hung the thing itself, the Cacodominus, not seated upon a throne as men sat, not standing as tyrants stood, suspended, installed, enthroned through violation and design. Its body was vast and withered, a pale alien carcass folded into a cybernetic reliquary of brass ribs, iron clamps, crystal nerve veins, surgical scaffolds, and throbbing psychic engines. Its skull was elongated and crowned with antennae that stabbed upward through layers of machinery. Cables entered its spine, throat, eye sockets, and exposed brain matter, descending like gallows ropes into lower vaults where enslaved choirs screamed around it without pause. Black iron arches enclosed it like the ribs of a cathedral built for something that had decided godhood was a matter of sufficient pain. Its psychic geometry did not remain still. The angles around it moved. Bridges bent without breaking. Shadows fell in directions denied by light. Towers appeared to pass through one another and emerge whole. Staring too long at the image caused the mind to arrange itself incorrectly. One Navy admiral made the sign of the Aquila with shaking hands. "Exterminatus level bombardment," he said. His voice cracked despite his rank. "Break the inner ring. Saturate with cyclonic torpedoes. Lance the planetoid until no stone remains. Let the Xenos choke on its own grave." Several mortal commanders murmured agreement, some because they believed it tactically sound, others because the thought of descending into that place had already broken something in them. Hesteron 9 answered without hesitation. "Negative. Catastrophic probability. The fortress is not inert structure. It is a psychic containment and amplification apparatus. Unsequenced destruction risks uncontrolled immaterial backlash. Scale estimate exceeds local theater. Possible propagation through enslaved relay architecture." The Admiral turned on the Magos. "Speak plainly, Machine Priest." The Magos' optic lenses narrowed to green needles. "If you shatter the skull before severing the nerves, the scream may travel." Silence took the bridge. It was not full understanding, but it was enough. Morkant's Crozius struck the deck once. "Then we cut the nerves." Serevan looked from the planetoid fortress to the surrounding system. Every moon was a fortress. Every hive was a choir. Every shipwreck ring was a gun line. Every living soul below had been prepared as ammunition. "We will not kill it from orbit," he said. "We will reach it." The battle plan formed beneath the dying stars. The Imperial Navy would engage the outer ring and draw fire from the defense moons. Cruisers and battle barges would trade lance and macro cannon fire with weapons platforms large enough to gut continents. Escort squadrons would run suicide lanes through minefields and debris shoals, marking corridors for assault craft. Mechanicus macro haulers would disgorge Legio Cybernetica cohorts onto the nearest relay bastions, sending Cortex automata, siege servitors, and iron engines into zones where mortal minds could not be trusted. Black Templars' armored spearheads would seize landing zones across the Fortress Moon and the adjacent Hive world. Sword Brethren in Terminator Plate would be held for teleport strikes once void shields weakened. Emperor's champion Aldrich Thane would not be released until the path toward the central reliquary was open. Thane said nothing when the order was given. He stood at the rear of the War Council, the black sword held point down before him, helm lenses fixed upon the projected shape of the suspended alien. Inside his skull, the vision returned. The Cacodominus smiled without flesh. Its death was behind it, like a second shadow. Thane saw the black sword entering the skull. He saw the alien's crown shatter. He saw light, not golden, but white and wrong, exploding outward through tunnels of the warp. He saw astropathic choirs across impossible distance ignite in their thrones. He saw ships vanish, cities go blind, fleets drift without guidance, subsectors fall silent. He saw victory opening its mouth wider than defeat. Then the alien whispered inside the vision, "Come, champion, strike well. I have made my ending large enough for your faith." Thane's fingers tightened around the sword hilt. Morkant saw the motion. What does the witch show you? A trap. Then it fears the step that enters it. It wants to die only if death can wound us. Morkant leaned close, skull mask inches from the champion's helm. All enemies wish to make meaning of their end. Deny it pride, deny it mercy, deny it delay. Before Thane could answer, the system moved. The Cacodominus activated its empire. Across Catalexis Prime, billions rose as one. On the hive world nearest the fortress, every hab gate opened. Laborers marched from furnace districts with welding rigs, mining charges, autoguns, and lengths of chain. Planetary defense cohorts emerged from barracks in ranks so perfect they looked machined rather than trained. Arbite's precincts unlocked their armoriums and distributed execution shotguns to crowds that no longer possessed law, only command. Priests climbed pulpit towers and began ringing bells in patterns that burst the ears of those not already enthralled. Children, elders, manufactorum slaves, noble scions, corpse haulers, scribes, surgeons, dock workers, and condemned prisoners all walked toward mustering points beneath the same psychic rhythm. Every city became a barracks, every manufactorum became a gun, every pilgrim road became a marching column of meat. In orbit, the dead rings lit with weapons fire. The first macro barrage struck the crusade fleet like a judgment from murdered stars. Void shields flared across the judgment of dawn. Escort ships vanished behind walls of explosion. Lance beams from defense moons lanced through the dark, punching into cruisers, cutting through armor belts, boiling gun decks, and venting thousands of crewmen into space in glittering clouds. The Imperial answer came with equal fury. Battle barges fired broadsides that shook their own cathedral hulls. Navy vessels launched torpedo spreads dense enough to eclipse the stars behind them. Lance batteries stabbed through shipwreck barricades and carved molten trenches across orbital rings. The inner system became a furnace. Assault craft launched in swarms. Thunderhawks dived beneath flak webs. Drop pods fell through debris fields. Some smashed apart before atmosphere, others trailing fire as they plunged toward fortress decks and hive landing zones. Mechanicus carriers opened their iron bellies, releasing automata cohorts in armored landers that descended without hesitation into psychic saturation zones. Servitor pilots flew through storms that would have driven sane men mad. Many died as their craft became fireballs. The rest landed. The ground war began across multiple worlds at once. On the Fortress Moon, Black Templars tanks rolled from landing craters under a sky filled with falling debris. Land raiders advanced through fields of shattered hull plating, while the cannons burned enemy bunkers open. Vindicators fired siege shells into relay bastions, collapsing towers made from bone and brass. Rhinos disgorged crusader squads into trench lines filled with enthralled defenders. Bolters detonated bodies in red bursts. Chainswords howled through limbs and rib cages. Flamers turned barricades into pyres. The ground ran with blood, oil, and melted snow from the moon's frozen upper crust. On the hive world below, Imperial Guard and armsmen attacked beneath a rain of ash, while Black Templars' spearheads drove for the resonant spires. Titan-scale artillery, mounted in shrine fortresses and crawling siege platforms, hammered entire districts flat. Enslaved PDF armies answered with massed batteries and human wave assaults so dense that the first ranks died by being crushed beneath those behind them. Servitor cohorts marched into the killing fields with rad weapons and heavy flamers, their flesh components sloughing from heat while their machine limbs continued firing. Above it all, knights dueled in the shadow of dead moons. Loyal engines, brought by desperate oath-bound houses not yet touched by the Xenos, strode beside Imperial armor with battle cannons roaring. Against them came the remaining dreadblades of the Cacodominus, iron apostates walking with alien precision and noble agony trapped inside their thrones. Thermal beams crossed the plains. Reaper chainswords screamed against ion shields. One loyal knight drove its chainsword into the belly of a dreadblade and was answered by a point-blank blast that turned its cockpit into cooked meat and molten glass. Both machines fell locked together, crushing entire infantry companies beneath their dying weight. At Bastion Theta Malediction, a Mechanicus landing zone became a charnel pit. Hesteron 9 had deployed 3 cohorts of Cortex automata there to storm a relay bastion whose spires amplified the Cacodominus's control over the Fortress Moon's southern hemisphere. The machines advanced in perfect lockstep through last fire, artillery bursts, and waves of enthralled militia. They did not fear the screams. They did not hear the prayers. They did not hesitate when bodies threw themselves under their feet. Then a dreadblade came down from the smoke. Its name rolled across the Vox in 100 stolen voices. The penitent engine of House Rauk. It landed from a grav-drop platform with enough force to flatten the first automata rank. Its Avenger Gatling cannon spun and cut through battle robots, Templars, servitors, and mortal engineers alike, reducing them to shredded fragments and pink mist. Its Thunderstrike gauntlet closed around a Land Raider and crushed the vehicle until its reactor burst. The explosion washed over the landing zone, turning men into shadows and machines into red-hot silhouettes. A Templar squad tried to reach its legs with melter charges. The dreadblades stepped on them. Ceramite cracked. Bodies burst beneath the pressure, blood jetting from broken armor seals. A wounded sword brother dragged himself forward with both legs gone and still tried to arm the charge before a second step erased him. Hesteron 9 observed from a command crawler at the edge of the field. No grief passed through his voice. Cohort destroyed, landing zone compromised, redirecting reserve cohort through corpse field, adjusting target priority, dreadblade leg actuators, fire convergence authorized. The next cohort marched over the dead. They walked through the churned paste of men and machines, heavy weapons rising, reactor cores humming, command logic narrowing to the destruction of a single iron god. Behind them, Black Templars rallied under a torn banner and followed. Morkant's sermons roared through their helms. Seravan's orders cut through the static. Kask's armored spearhead turned from its assigned corridor and drove toward the Dreadblade's flank. The war fed itself men by the million and still demanded more. In the launch chapel of the Judgment of Dawn, Thane waited while the battle raged. Every instinct in him strained toward the fortress. Every vision dragged him by the soul toward the suspended skull. Yet Seravan had not released him, and obedience was its own blade. The Cacodominus filled the silence. It did not roar now. It spoke softly, with the intimacy of a hand inside his helm. You see it, black sword. You see the shape of my ending. Thane kept his eyes on the altar before him. I see a Xenos corpse not yet made. You see beyond it. Your kind is crude, but not blind. Kill me wrongly, and I shall sing through every wound I have opened. Kill me well, and I shall still leave you with the sound. Thane breathed slowly. Then I will kill you and endure the sound. A pause, almost amusement. Yes, that is why you are useful. The chapel doors opened. Marshal Serevan entered alone, armor scarred by fresh damage from a command deck impact that had nearly breached the battle barge's upper hull. His sword was drawn, not for ceremony, but because the ship itself had become a battlefield in spirit, if not yet in flesh. You heard it, Serevan said. Yes. It wants its death to matter. All deaths matter, Thane replied. The difference is whether they serve the Emperor or the enemy. Serevan looked toward the sealed reliquary doors, beyond which the black sword had been consecrated before deployment. Hesteron confirms the Magos warning. The amplifiers must be severed in sequence. We cannot annihilate the fortress from afar. We cannot withdraw and leave the core intact. Every hour it lives, more systems remain chained. More fleets are turned. More worlds become mouths. And if killing it breaks those mouths open, then we face that punishment after the execution. The battle barge shook as another lance strike battered its shields. Dust fell from the chapel vaults. The candle flames leaned toward the inner system, as if the ship itself wished to charge. Serevan placed one gauntlet upon Thane's shoulder. There is no clean path. Thane lifted the black sword. There never was. On the strategium, the war map bled with casualty runes, failing shield markers, corrupted channels, and desperate advances. The first relay bastions were burning. The second line of orbital defenses had begun to buckle. The fortress moon still lived. The Cacodominus still sang through billions.
Remember, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Support helps.
Marshal Odo Serevan looked upon the butcher's arithmetic of the campaign and made the only decision left to a son of Dawn. Even if the Xenos' death was a trap, its life was a greater one. Commit all reserves, he ordered. Sever the amplifiers. Open the way to the throne. The champion goes when the last gate breaks. Across Catalexis Prime, ships died, cities screamed, knights fell, and the Black Templars advanced into the mouth of a god that had made suffering into language. At the center of the system, suspended in its reliquary of nerves, the Cacodominus waited, and every world at war screamed in harmony. Vigilus Mortis rose from the void like a skull nailed to the heavens. It was a fortress moon, only by the poverty of mortal language. Its crust had been cut open and plated with black iron. Its crater seas were filled with gun emplacements, slave barracks, ammunition cathedrals, and psychic towers whose upper veins turned slowly toward the crusade fleet like listening blades. Rings of wreckage circled it in broken halos. The dead ships embedded there still fired when commanded, their gun decks crewed by corpses, enthralled ratings, and servitor things wired into command thrones until flesh and machine had forgotten the difference between obedience and torment. The first psychic lock protecting the inner sanctum of the Cacodominus lay beneath the moon's northern pole, inside a bastion complex called Mortis Gate by the recovered enemy traffic. It was not a gate in the manner of doors. It was a wound in the moon's architecture, a fortress sunk through the crust into the nerve vaults below, where choirs of enslaved psychers, augmetic amplifiers, and population pain engines held part of the Xenos tyrant's dominion in place. While it endured, the path toward the central reliquary remained closed beneath layers of psychic force. Marshal Odo Serevan did not order a clean assault. There were no clean assaults left. The void above Vigilus Mortis became a furnace before the first drop craft entered descent. Navy bombardment groups hammered the outer batteries with lance fire and macro shells until whole ridges rose into molten clouds. The Judgment of Dawn fired broadside after broadside, each shell carrying enough force to gut city blocks, each impact sending shockwaves through the armored crust below. Defense towers answered with streams of missiles and beams of white heat. Escort ships died in pieces. Assault boats vanished in flak storms. A troop carrier split open above the moon, spilling burning vehicles, screaming armsmen, and devotional banners into the dark. Then, the Black Templars fell. Drop pods struck the killing fields around Mortis Gate in iron rain. Thunderhawks screamed through ash and tracer fire, their hulls rattling beneath impacts, their heavy bolters roaring into trench lines packed with enthralled defenders. Land raiders rolled from armored landers with engines growling, their tracks crushing wire, bone, and plasteel debris into the moon dust. Rhinos followed behind them in tight wedge formation, black hulls marked with white crosses, storm bolters firing as they advanced. Vindicators crawled into siege position and lowered their demolisher cannons toward the gate bastions. The defenders came from every shadow and gun slit. They were still Imperial. That was the horror of it. Guardsmen in scorched flak armor advanced in perfect ranks with laser guns raised. Hive militia surged around them in patched carapace and ragged work gear. Priests strode at their center, carrying icons of the Emperor in hands that shook against stolen command. Voidsmen with boarding axes charged from wrecked bastions, their faces pale from shipboard life and their mouths bleeding from the effort of resisting. Skitarii remnants moved in broken formation, augmetic limbs twitching, red robes caked in ash, their noospheric cant drowned beneath the stronger will of the Cacodominus. Noble household retainers in gilded plate fired heirloom plasma weapons while tears boiled down their cheeks. Every one of them spoke as one. "You come to open what I have closed." Serevan stood in the command cupola of a land raider as it ground across the outer trench belt. Shells burst around him. Dust and pulverized bone washed over his armor. His sword was drawn, the chain binding it to his wrist, clattering with every impact. "Incendiary saturation," he ordered. "Rad cleansers on the left trench networks. Demolition teams to the bastion feet. Armored wedge maintains pressure. Do not stop for the enthralled. Do not answer pleas. Do not break formation." The order went out. The moon began to burn. Flamer squads advanced behind the land raiders and poured promethium into trench mouths. Fire rolled along dugouts and command pits, turning packed bodies into flailing silhouettes. Rad cleanser teams moved in sealed armor through militia tunnels, flooding them with invisible death. Men died choking, skin blistering beneath uniforms, still trying to lift rifles with fingers that had begun to slough apart. Demolition charges opened red wounds in bunker walls. Vindicators fired at point blank into gate towers, blasting stonecrete, iron, and human defenders into vapor and fragments. The Templars were cruel because the battlefield had left them no other weapon sharp enough. A priest stumbled from the smoke with his hands raised, Aquila pendant swinging from his neck. "Mercy!" he gasped. Then his spine straightened, and the alien voice came through him. "Mercy is inefficiency wearing gold." A neophyte hesitated. Sword brother Gideon Wrath did not. His bolter fired once, and the priest's chest vanished in a burst of red pulp and shattered rib. The neophyte looked at him through helm lenses bright with shame. "Your pity almost gave it another tongue," Wrath said. "Learn faster." The psychic assault began when the first armored wedge reached the gate causeway. Vox grills set into the bastion walls opened. They were not normal emitters. Each one had a human throat mounted behind it, preserved alive by tubes and pins, stretched into the machinery until sound became torture. Their screams came in layered frequencies. Mortal soldiers dropped instantly. Some clutched their helmets as their eyes ruptured and ran down their cheeks in dark threads. Others fell into seizures, boots hammering against the ground, teeth cracking under clenched jaws. A Navy armsman tore off his own faceplate and began clawing at his skull until his fingers broke against bone. Another raised his shotgun and fired into his squad, weeping apologies between blasts. The Black Templars had brought no librarians to answer the witch with witchcraft. They had brought armor. They had brought hatred. They had brought prayer. They had brought blades. Their vox channels filled with litanies, not counterspells, not psychic wards, but declarations of refusal. Chaplains led the chants. Initiates roared them. Sword brethren repeated them through cracked helms and blood-filled mouths. They advanced while the screams hammered against them, their minds clenched around vows like fists around sword hilts. Abhor the witch, their boots crushed the dead. Destroy the witch, their bolters rose. Suffer not the unclean, their blades came down. To live. Reclusiarch Morcant reached the outer gatehouse at the head of a charge so violent it seemed less an attack than a verdict. The gatehouse was a towering slab of black metal and bone-white stone, its arch filled with hanging bodies. Crucified astropaths lined the walls, nailed through wrists, ankles, and throats, their blind eyes wired open, their skulls linked by conductor rods. They were alive. Their mouths worked soundlessly until the psychic wave forced air through them, making them sing the gate's defense into being. Mortal soldiers faltered at the sight. Morcant did not slow. A sergeant shouted over the scream, "My lord, they are sanctioned servants." "They are suffering servants," Morcant replied, "and the witch has made suffering into a weapon." He raised his Crozius. "Prometheum." The flamer team obeyed. Fire swept across the crucified choir. Robes caught first, then skin, then hair, then the sacred parchment nailed to their chests. The astropaths screamed with their own voices for a heartbeat before flame consumed the alien's song. The psychic pressure faltered. Morcant strode through the burning bodies as they fell from their nails around him. "The Emperor will know which souls were loyal," he thundered. "We are here to deny the alien their flesh." The gatehouse fell beneath hammer, bolt, and flame. Beyond it waited the breach field, a killing ground between the outer defenses and the inner fortress wall. It was filled with barricades made from tank wrecks, corpses, shrine masonry, and coil after coil of razor wire strung with little bells. The bells began to ring without wind as the Templars advanced. Every chime carried a needle of pain behind the eyes. Land raiders drove into the field first, Lascannons burning holes through bunker fronts. Rhinos followed tight behind, doors slamming open as Crusader squads disembarked into fire. Sword brethren came last, not as reserve, but as the edge held back until the armor had carried it close enough to cut. They charged into elite thralls, wearing the colors of noble households, men with power blades, shock lances, plasma pistols, and jeweled masks through which the Cacodominus laughed. The melee became butchery at arm's length. Power swords split helms and faces. Chainswords tore arms from sockets and chewed through torsos until fragments sprayed across armor plates. A noble retainer drove a power lance through a Templar's abdomen and out through his back. The wounded warrior trapped the haft against his body, dragged himself closer, and crushed the retainer's head with a combat blade driven through the eye socket. Wrath hacked through 3 household guards in as many breaths, each blow brutally efficient, each kill answered by a growled fragment of vow. A Skitari remnant lunged at him, galvanic rifle firing until the muzzle touched his breastplate. Wrath seized the weapon, broke it in half, and drove the broken barrel through the warrior's throat. Oil, blood, and augmetic fluid spilled over his gauntlet. The inner wall began to open. At first, the Templars thought it was a gate. Then the thing stepped through. A Knight-class engine emerged from the smoke, smaller than the greatest Dreadblades, but still tall enough to blot the burning sky. Its heraldry had been scraped away. The pilot's household crest hung upside down from chains fixed to the carapace. Its ion shield flickered like diseased light. One arm bore a rapid-fire battle cannon. The other ended in a chain blade whose teeth were clogged with flesh from earlier lines. Its vox boomed with 2 voices,
One human, broken and pleading. Run. One alien, calm and amused. Remain. The battle cannon fired. A Land Raider vanished under the impact, its top armor punched inward, its interior erupting in flame. The assault ramp burst open from pressure, throwing burning bodies across the field. A Rhino tried to reverse and was split lengthwise by the
Chainblade. The knight strode forward, crushing wounded men beneath its feet, each step forcing blood and soil up in thick sprays. Castellanbor's cask moved toward it. "Cask," Serevan voxed. "Hold the breach. Terminator teleport pattern is locking. You need only keep the gate open." Cask looked at the knight, then at the widening gap behind it, where the inner fortress yawned. "Then I will be the hinge." He gathered the surviving breachers, melter-bearers, and sword brethren around him. They did not have enough strength left to destroy the knight cleanly. They had enough to delay it. In war, that was often the only difference between failure and glory. "On me," Cask said. They charged. Melters fired into the knight's knee joint. The first blast washed across the ion shield. The second punched through weakened plating and exposed pistons glowing white with heat. Thunder hammers struck the same wound. A sword brother was kicked aside, armor caving in, body folding around the impact like crushed tin and meat. Another climbed onto the knight's shin and drove a crack charge into a rent before a defense stubber stitched him from groin to throat. Cask reached the foot of the engine and fired his bolt pistol upward until the magazine ran dry. Then he drew his power sword and cut through hydraulic cables as thick as his arm. The knight staggered, but did not fall. Its chain blade came down. Cask met it with his sword. For an impossible heartbeat, the field around him flashed white as power fields screamed against adamantine teeth. Then the force drove him to one knee. The chain blade bit into his shoulder guard, tore through ceramite, flesh and bone, and opened him from collar to ribs. Blood poured down his armor in sheets. He did not die. He wedged his sword into the knight's leg assembly and locked both gauntlets around the hilt. "Now," he voxed. The teleport strike arrived. Terminator-armored sword brethren materialized beyond the knight in crackling blue light, inside the threshold of the inner fortress. Storm bolters opened. Thunder hammers rose. Cyclone missiles streaked into the gate defenses. The breach held because Cask held it, pinned beneath the engine's shadow, his body ruined, his blade jammed in the apostate machine. The knight tried to step back and crush the teleport formation. Cask triggered the melter charges at his feet. The explosion consumed him from below. White fire climbed the knight's leg, blew the damaged joint apart, and hurled the engine sideways into the gate arch. It fell with a roar of tortured metal, crushing defenders, shattering the threshold, and widening the breach under its own collapsing mass. Cask vanished in the blast. No body remained whole enough for recovery. Only his sword was later found, fused into the knight's broken knee, still chained to a severed gauntlet. For a moment, even the vox seemed silent. Then Wrath's voice cut through it, low and savage. "Castellan Cask has opened the way. Take it, or be unworthy of his death." The surviving assault elements rallied to him. His hatred had become something near animal, but it did not break its leash. It moved inside the cage of oath and discipline, making every command sharper, every kill colder. He did not scream Cask's name as a mourning brother might. He used it as a weapon. "Forward, we drag his name to the Xenos throne in blood." They entered the inner fortress. The psychic lock lay beneath a vault of black arches and screaming machinery. Its central mechanism was a tower of flesh, brass, and crystal, fed by cables running into pits where thousands of enthralled bodies were packed together, each one pierced by conductor hooks, each one kept alive only to suffer in rhythm. The Terminators broke the guard line. Wrath's remaining warriors planted charges. Morkant entered last, skull helm blackened by soot, Crozius dripping blood from its winged head. The Cacodominus spoke through the lock. "You kill what you claim to save." Morkant lifted his Crozius. "We save what death returns to the Emperor." The charges detonated. The first psychic lock died in a storm of fire and ruptured thought. Across Vigilus Mortis, defense towers went dark. Vox grills burst outward, spraying meat and metal. Enslaved armies collapsed mid-charge. Some died instantly. Some woke. Across the system, millions of human beings regained themselves for one unbearable moment. They saw the guns in their hands. They saw the bodies at their feet. They remembered the friends they had killed, the prayers they had mocked, the gates they had defended for the thing inside their skulls. Their scream rose from moons, ships, hives, trenches, and burning towers. It was not a scream of pain. It was recognition. On the corpse-strewn threshold of Mortis Gate, the Black Templars stood amid ash, blood, and broken iron, while the sound washed over them. Wrath looked down at the molten ruin where Karsk had died. "First lock broken," he said. Above them, deeper within Catalexis Prime, the remaining locks began to howl. The broken star array circled a dying sun, like a crown of thorns driven into the skull of a god. The star at the heart of it had once burned white, if the corrupted Mechanicus records were to be trusted. Now, it pulsed a sickly red beneath a veil of black prominences, its surface trembling as if some vast parasite had sunk roots into the furnace of its heart. Around it turned the array, a ring of fortress stations, psychic veins, void anchors, dead ships, resonance towers, and captured choir vaults chained together across distances so immense that even the hololithic projections aboard the Judgment of Dawn could only show fragments at a time. The Cacodominus had made the star sing, not with light, not with heat, with pain. Every solar flare rolled through the array and returned as a psychic pulse that strengthened the locks around the inner sanctum. Every station in the ring held enslaved astropaths, navigators, priests, void crews, and machine adepts, each one wired into harmonic engines that drank agony and translated it into command. The array guarded the road to the central reliquary, and around it drifted void mines in black fields, enslaved cruisers with dead heraldry, defense platforms armed with lance batteries, and the towering silhouettes of several dreadblade knights fixed upon gravitic assault cradles like idols waiting to be hurled into war. Long-range fire failed almost at once. The first Navy barrage should have broken the outer platforms. Instead, the macro shells curved away from impact lines as if the void itself had become fluid. Lance beams bent around psychic distortion fields, striking empty space or passing through ghosts of stations no longer where the augurs insisted they were. Torpedoes detonated prematurely inside gravity traps, seeded between the minefields. Escort ships that tried to hold safe distance found their targeting cogitators, filling with false returns, each one broadcasting pleas for aid in the voices of their own captains. Marshal Odo Serevan read the reports, watched 3 salvos die without purpose, and gave the only order left. "Close the range." The fleet obeyed. Imperial ships advanced into the throat of the array beneath full burn. Void shields flared as mines woke and hurled themselves toward the prows. Point defense batteries filled space with tracer fire. Attack craft streaked between kilometer-long hulls and died against invisible pressure waves. Cruisers closed until lance fire no longer needed clean auger truth, until gunnery crews could see the enemy through armored viewports and aim by hatred as much as calculation. The Cacodominus did not meet them with simple force. It bled them with intelligence. An enslaved cruiser bearing the name Hand of Benediction broke formation from the array and fled, trailing atmosphere, vox prayers, and emergency distress codes. A Navy captain pursued, believing the vessel crippled and ready for boarding. The fleeing ship let him close. Then its corpse engines fired in reverse, its prow opened like a wound, and a hidden mine cluster detonated between both hulls. The pursuing cruiser vanished in a bloom of plasma, its crew dying before the warning left their throats. The hand of benediction survived long enough to transmit laughter through a choir of dead ratings before lance fire gutted it. Another captured ship broadcast the command codes of a missing Imperial escort squadron and requested permission to rejoin the line. When challenged, it transmitted the proper catechism, the proper seal, the proper voice of a Commodore dead for 9 days. Serevan ordered it destroyed. The vessel accelerated before the lances struck, ramming a munition barge at full burn. Both ships broke open, spilling shells, tanks, men, and burning promethium into the void. The explosion lit the array in brief gold, like a false dawn over a grave. Gravity traps seized 2 troop transports and dragged them toward the dying star. Their engines screamed against the pull. Their crews chanted final rites over open Vox. The ships fell slowly, shields failing, hulls glowing, men packed inside them as the star's red light turned everything to furnace glare. One transport broke apart before contact, becoming a storm of molten fragments. The other struck a solar prominence and vanished without sound. Reclusiarch Morcant watched from the bridge, unmoving. "The witch spends men as though it were born imperial," he said. Serevan did not look away from the battle map. It learns from what it wears. At the edge of the array, Magos Dominus Hesteron 9 deployed his answer. Boarding torpedoes were loaded not with mortal armsmen, but with Legio Cybernetica cohorts. Cortex automata stood locked into launch frames, their metal bodies daubed with sacred unguents, their weapons calibrated by Binharic rite. Siege servitors knelt between them, heavy cutters folded against their backs. Their pilots were dead men, reduced to command impulses and obedience glands, sealed into control nodes where no fear could remain. They had no prayers fit for chaplains, but the tech marines marked their hulls with the sign of the Omnissiah and the Aquila before the torpedoes fired. They crossed the minefield under murderous fire. Many died in transit. A torpedo struck a void mine and became a sphere of tumbling limbs and red-hot metal. Another was caught by a defense platform's beam and sliced open, scattering automata into space like broken icons. The survivors punched into the outer array stations with impact force enough to buckle decks. Inside, no human mind could have endured. The corridors of the broken star array did not keep consistent gravity. Floors became walls without warning. Blood floated upward in globes, then fell sideways in sheets. Vox static carried childhood memories from men who had never served there. Doors opened onto the same chamber from impossible directions. Human crewmen hardwired into the walls sang in languages they had not known, while their bodies twitched under electrical command. The automata marched anyway. Their heavy feet struck deck plating, ceiling plating, bulkhead plating, whatever direction had been assigned as forward by machine command. Relay engines burned under Volkite fire. Living conduits were executed by bolt, plasma, and crushing metal fists. Choir organs were severed with rotary saws. One automaton walked through a corridor filled with inverted gravity and shredded bodies, its metal hands closing around each screaming conduit and twisting until spines snapped and signal flow died. Hesteron 9 received the kill confirmations in streams of Binharic data. Outer harmonic strand collapsing, the Magos intoned. Pressure window opening, boarding assault viable, champion vector probable. Serevan turned toward him. Probable by whose authority? Before the Magos could answer, the launch chapel doors of the Judgment of Dawn opened. Uldric Thane was already gone. The Emperor's champion had seen the path in a vision before any order reached him. He had seen a bridge of black light stretching through the array. He had seen the dying star open like an eye. He had seen a dreadblade kneeling inside a chamber where gravity and memory were butchered into weapons. He had heard the Cacodominus speak not from afar, but from within the pulse of the star itself. So he had walked to the Thunderhawk alone, and the serfs had not dared bar his way. The champion did not wait for command, because his purpose was older than command. He was the blade drawn for the greatest foe. He was not a captain arranging men upon a board. He was a verdict seeking a throat. His Thunderhawk struck the central array station under cover of a Navy Lance barrage that stripped half the station's outer plating. The assault ramp blew open into a corridor full of floating blood. Thane stepped into zero weight, with mag boots locking to the deck 1 heartbeat later, black sword raised, armor lit by the red glare of the dying sun through fractured viewports. Behind him came Sword Brother Wrath and the remnants of Karsk's assault elements. No one spoke of the Castellan. His absence marched with them. The central station fought like a living animal. Turrets unfolded from wall shrines. Voidsmen stapled to weapons rigs opened fire, their torsos jerking with each shot. Servitors crawled from maintenance wells with mining drills welded to their arms. Priests floated upside down in the broken gravity, robes spread like funeral banners, mouths open in a hymn that made mortal blood vessels burst. The Black Templars advanced through it all, boots locking and releasing, bolters roaring in bursts that punched men apart and splashed wet matter against walls and ceiling alike. Wrath led the rear guard with a brutality that had sharpened after Karsk's death. He did not rage wildly. He spent hate with discipline. A thrall officer swung a power axe at his helm. Wrath caught the haft, dragged the man close, and drove a combat blade beneath the jaw until the tip burst through the skull. Another crewman begged in his own voice for death before the alien could reclaim him. Wrath gave it with a bolt round and did not slow. The path opened into the memory chamber. It was round, vast, and wrong. At its center stood no physical knight, yet the shape of one occupied the air, a psychic avatar projected from a Dreadblade pilot bound somewhere deeper within the array's linked command systems. Its armor was formed from recollection, pain, and red starlight. Its helm bore the heraldry of a noble household twisted into a crown of hooks. Its chainsword was made of screaming faces. Gravity bent around it in slow spirals. Men appeared within its shadow, died, vanished, and appeared again. The pilot spoke first. "Champion!" The voice beneath was human, old, and broken. Then the Cacodominus spoke through him. "Witness what your obedience purchases." The chamber vanished. Thane stood upon Malachor Tertius as its cathedral brains burst under charges. He felt the deaths as if each were a nail driven through his spine. He stood upon Varadon Secundus while the central spire collapsed and millions vanished beneath stone. He marched with the burning people of Gethsemar into furnace mouths. He drowned in the troop transports falling into the star. He wore the bodies of men he had killed for mercy, and each of their final breaths became a hand around his throat. The psychic avatar struck. Thane parried by instinct. The black sword met the scream-forged chainblade, and the chamber returned in a flash of sparks and blood-red light. He slid back, armor grinding against the deck, then advanced. The Cacodominus pressed harder. He saw entire planets die, hive cities turning their guns inward, astropathic choirs igniting, governors kneeling with tears on their faces, children reciting prayers while their hands held knives. He saw himself above them all, not as savior, but executioner. A mountain of bodies rose beneath his boots until it reached the throne of the alien. "Condemn yourself," the Cacodominus whispered. "You are efficient. You are useful. You kill what I have used, and I need only use more." Thane answered with no comfort. He did not say the dead were saved. He did not say the cost was light. He did not pretend that blood became clean because it was spilled beneath an aquila. He recited condemnation. For every stolen hand, a debt. For every chained world, a debt. For every throat made into your instrument, a debt. For every soul burned by your dominion, a debt. The avatar struck again. Thane caught the blow on the black sword, stepped inside the arc, and drove his shoulder into the projected knight's chest. Pain exploded through him,
memories not his own clawing at his helm seals, but he kept moving. "I am not absolution," he snarled. "I am collection." He cut. The black sword passed through psychic armor and into the pilot's projected heart. Somewhere within the array, the real Dreadblade pilot screamed as the chain between him and the Cacodominus snapped. The avatar collapsed inward, becoming a storm of ash, red light, and old noble oaths spoken for the first time in freedom since enslavement. The chamber's gravity returned all at once. Bodies slammed to the deck. Blood rained down. Wrath was already planting charges. "Central relay exposed," he voxed. "We need the Mechanicus cut and Navy strike together, or this beast will stitch itself shut." Hester and Nine answered through static from a station control spine where his automata were dying by the dozen. Sabotage sequence initiated. Relay engines overloaded. Machine sacrifice acceptable. Manual detonation required at spinal.
Junction. Survival probability negligible. Wrath looked at the surviving brothers. Their armor was cracked, blackened, and slick with blood. None looked away. "Cask opened a gate," he said. "We close a star." They moved into the spinal junction under fire from every direction. The final corridor was packed with living conduits chained into alcoves, each one screaming the same warning. Wrath shot them as he passed. A brother carrying the first charge was cut in half by a defense laser, his legs continuing 3 steps before falling. Another took the charge and kept running until a servitor claw tore out his throat. Wrath caught the device before it hit the deck and drove himself onward. Outside, the Navy came in close enough to die. Cruisers crossed the broken minefield at suicidal range. The Judgment of Dawn and its escorts fired into the array's exposed veins, while defense platforms hammered their shields down to flaring tatters. A lance strike speared through the central station's outer crown, exactly as Hester on 9's automata burned out the last stabilizing engine. The station lurched toward the dying star. Wrath reached the spinal junction. It was a chamber of brass arteries and black crystal, all of it pulsing with the stolen agony of the array. He slammed the charge into the heart of it and locked the arming rune with a bloody gauntlet. "Wrath to all surviving elements," he voxed. "Withdraw if you have the road. If not, die facing the correct direction." Thane seized him by the shoulder. "You are leaving?" Wrath looked toward the charge. "I am finishing." The champion stared at him for a heartbeat. Then he nodded. "By blade, brother. By blood." Thane withdrew with the remaining warriors as the countdown became a litany of red warning runes. Wrath stayed. When the first wave of enthralled defenders surged into the chamber, he met them with chainsword and bolter. He killed until the floor vanished beneath bodies. He killed until his bolter clicked dry. He killed with blade, fist, and broken teeth of his chainsword. The last picked capture showed him standing before the charge, surrounded by dead men, swinging a shattered sword at a priest whose mouth carried the voice of the Cacodominus. Then the spinal junction detonated. Mechanicus sabotage, Templar charges, Navy lance fire, and the final manual breach struck the broken star array as one. The ring around the dying sun came apart. Stations broke loose from their orbits and collided. Psychic veins shattered into glittering storms. Choir chambers ruptured, venting bodies and screams into the void. Defense platforms spun into the star. Enslaved cruisers lost command cohesion and drifted into each other in silent blooms of fire. Several Dreadblade cradles broke apart, sending the iron apostates tumbling into solar glare like fallen idols. The dying star flared. For one terrible moment, the entire system was lit red. Then the psychic pressure weakened. Not vanished, not broken entirely, weakened. Across the fleet, astropaths collapsed, but did not immediately burn. Vox channels cleared enough for command voices to pass without screaming beneath them. The inner path toward the Cacodominus's reliquary opened as a wound of navigable darkness between the remaining defenses. And for the first time since the Crusade had entered Catalex's prime, The voice of the Cacodominus came through without amusement. It was immense. It was furious. It spoke directly into every Black Templar helm, bypassing vox, seal, oath, and steel. Come then, little murder priests. I have prepared a kingdom inside your skulls. There were no reserves when the final assault began. The crusade had spent them all. It had spent its escort squadrons in the minefields of the Broken Star. It had spent its mortal regiments in the furnace avenues of Varadon and the ash plains of Vigilus Mortis. It had spent its astropaths screaming in iron chairs until their souls became cinders. It had spent its tanks in killing grounds where the dust was now more blood than soil. It had spent its honored dead, its ancient machines, its ammunition, its prayers, its mercy. Only purpose remained. The fortress of the Cacodominus filled the forward Picts of the Judgment of Dawn until it seemed less a target than an approaching continent. It drifted within the inner dark of Catalex's prime, immense beyond fortress, beyond vessel, beyond sane. Construction. The thing had been built from a planetoid, but the planetoid had been gutted, plated, opened, and remade into a body. Mountain ranges had become armor ridges. Craters had been sealed with stolen ship plating. Cathedral towers from murdered imperial worlds jutted from its surface like broken teeth. Xenos pylons rose between them in shapes that made targeting cogitators stutter. Vast cables pulsed across its skin, some black iron, some brass, some wet and translucent, carrying fluids and impulses between towers that acted not as spires, but as psychic vertebrae. Its defense guns were not crude. They were slaved. Beneath each macro turret, within each lance battery, inside each missile vault, living brains hung in nutrient chains, eyes removed, skulls peeled open, nerves threaded into weapon logic. When the guns turned, the brains screamed. When the guns fired, the screams became part of the recoil. Every shell launched from the fortress carried not only explosives, but pain encoded into command. Marshal Odo Serevan stood at the head of the assault command deck in full plate, sword drawn, armor scarred from 100 impacts since the crusade had entered Catalex's prime. The black cross upon his shoulder had been cracked by shrapnel and sealed with battlefield resin. His tabard was stiff with ash and dried blood. "All surviving ships," he said, voice carried through the fleet. "Advance." No one asked for extraction corridors. There were none. No captain asked where the reserves would form. There were none. No serf, soldier, armsman, initiate, sword brother, tech marine, or pilot believed he would see another sunrise clean of red light. That did not matter. The Black Templars had declared crusade. A declared crusade did not retreat from the throat of the foe because the throat had teeth. The fleet went in. The void around the fortress erupted. Imperial ships crossed the last distance under direct fire, shields flaring, armor plates peeling away, weapon decks vanishing beneath impacts. A Navy cruiser drove forward after losing its bridge. Command transferred to a lower battery shrine, where a dying lieutenant ordered ramming speed with his entrails held inside by a belt and one shaking hand. It struck an outer defense spur and cracked it open, dying with its engines still burning. Mechanicus macro haulers discharged their final landers before being split by lance fire. Gunships launched from crippled decks. Drop pods fired from battle barges already shedding atmosphere. The Judgment of Dawn took 3 fortress shells across its starboard flank. The first tore open a launch bay and hurled Thunderhawks, tanks, serfs, and burning Promethium into space. The second gutted a macro cannon deck, crushing hundreds of crewmen beneath collapsing loading rails. The third struck a chapel vault and shattered the bones of martyrs into dust that drifted through the ship like grey snow. Reclusiarch Severian Morcant began the chant before the first assault craft hit the fortress skin. His voice filled every vox channel the chaplains could seize. "Abhor the witch," thousands answered. destroy the witch, suffer not the unclean, to live, again, again, again. The chant became armor over thought. Mortal soldiers clung to it like men clinging to wreckage in a black sea. Templars roared it through helm grills. Vehicle crews carved it into the air while driving through fire. Thunderhawk pilots repeated it while their cockpits filled with smoke. Chaplains demanded it from the dying and received it from shattered Vox units after the throats behind them had stopped moving. The first drop wave struck the fortress upon a plateau of stolen ship hulls welded together into an armored plane. Land raiders rolled from impact cradles under storms of defensive fire. Rhinos followed in wedge formation, their hulls battered by shrapnel and bone flechettes fired from wall guns. Vindicators deployed and fired at tower bases, demolisher shells punching into black iron and nerve tissue beneath it. Where the shells struck, the fortress bled. Not oil, not coolant alone. Thick red fluid burst from ruptured channels and steamed in the airless cold before freezing in sheets. Seravan led from the ground. His land raider, the Vow of Stone, drove at the head of the main spearhead with lascannons burning enemy emplacements from the fortress skin. When the assault ramp dropped, the marshal was first. Onto the surface. Thralls surged toward him from gun pits and access wounds. Guardsmen, voidsmen, Skitari remnants, noble retainers, priests, lobotomized serfs, and dead men moved by machine impulse. He met them with sword and pistol, cutting not with frenzy, but with butcher's economy. His bolt rounds tore torsos open. His blades split helms and faces. Those who begged died with those who laughed, for both voices could be stolen before the next breath. Forward, he voxed. The gate spine lies beneath the central ridge. We do not halt until it is broken. The fortress opened itself against them. Corridors yawned in the surface like surgical wounds. The Templars entered through breaching charges and melter burns, descending into passages that pulsed with artificial organs. Walls flexed around stolen ship plating. Veins of cable ran beneath transparent membranes. Servo skulls with human tongues nailed into their jaws chattered warnings in broken High Gothic. The floor trembled beneath rhythmic contractions deeper within the planetoid. Every chamber smelled of hot iron, antiseptic rot, machine oil, and exposed viscera. The Cacodominus waited inside every sound. It whispered through the ventilation. It spoke through dead Vox units. It used the voices of fallen brothers. At first, the Templars ignored the dead. Then, the dead rose. A fallen initiate named Brax, killed during the breach by a shard through the throat, stood up behind his squad with his head hanging at an impossible angle. His armor twitched. His helm grills sparked. Something inside the warplate forced his body forward in jerking steps, using residual neural impulse, armor muscle bundles, and corpse reflex. His bolter came up. He fired into the back of the brother before him. The shell detonated through the warrior's spine and burst from his chest in a spray of bone, ceramite, and lung matter. For a heartbeat, the squad froze. Then the corpse of Brax spoke in the Cacodominus's voice. Brotherhood is only a chain with warmer words. They destroyed him with bolt fire. That was only the first. Across the assault front, fallen Templars twitched back into motion. The alien could not truly possess their souls, but it exploited armor systems, neural remnants, damaged autosenses, and whatever dying echo remained in flesh, not yet cold. Honored dead became stumbling weapons. A sword brother with half his skull gone swung a power axe into his own squad before a chaplain smashed his chest apart with a crozius. A dead heavy flamer-bearer rose long enough to bathe a corridor in burning promethium, immolating allies and thralls alike. A dreadnought sarcophagus, breached and empty of life, dragged itself forward on ruined limbs, broadcasting the battle cant of the hero it had housed while firing into the living. The alien turned loyalty into a weapon. It turned memory into infection. It turned brotherhood into torment. Morkant strode through the worst of it, spiritual command held like a burning brand. His skull helm was cracked across one cheek. His crozius was black with carbon and red with human remains. Around him, chaplains ordered continuous chanting, never allowing silence to form. The litanies filled corridors where screams might otherwise take root. "Speak the vow," Morkant commanded, as a dying Templar clawed at his own helm, trying to tear it free before the Xenos could use him. "Abhor," the warrior choked. "Speak it." "Abhor the witch." Morkant placed a bolt pistol against the warrior's helm. "Destroy the witch." The pistol fired. The body fell still. "His oath is complete," Morkant said, and turned the crozius upon the next wave. Magos Dominus Hesteron IX's automata carved the deepest path. The Legio Cybernetica cohorts marched ahead of the flesh, where the psychic pressure had grown strong enough to make mortal soldiers bleed from the eyes. Their metal bodies forced open bulkhead gates. Their volkite and plasma weapons burned through living barricades. They tore relay engines from sockets with iron claws. They executed human conduits without hesitation, crushing skulls, severing spines, burning nerve bundles until the walls stopped speaking. For a time, iron prevailed. Then even the machines began to fail. Near the central nerve vault, the psychic density became a pressure that damaged command wetware. Cortex units sparked, logic chains looped. Servitor pilots screamed, though. Most had no tongues. Automata froze mid-stride, then turned their weapons upon one another, as the alien found the thin places where flesh had once guided machine obedience. One battle automaton tore open its own chest cavity and crushed its reactor core in both hands, bathing the corridor in blue fire. Another continued marching after its head was gone, firing into the ceiling until molten plating collapsed upon the squad behind it. Hesteron IX stood amid the failure, with cables sunk into a command shrine, optic lenses burning green. "Machine cognition compromised," he voxed. "Wetware contamination threshold exceeded. Cohort sacrifice proceeding." Serevan fought his way to the Magos position, through a corridor, knee-deep in bodies. "Can the path still be opened?" "Affirmative. Duration short. Cost total." "Spend it." "Already spent." The last automata charged the central defense nexus in silence. They were cut apart by psychic lightning and defense guns slaved to rows of screaming brains, but they reached the outer shielding pylons before destruction. One by one, they overloaded, detonating their cores against the nexus housing. The explosions broke the shielding field for 7 breaths. That was enough for Sword Brother Gideon Wrath. He had not died at the Broken Star, though the Crusade had named him dead for nearly an hour. A teleport flare had dragged him out half-burned, one arm fractured inside his armor, his chainsword ruined, his voice reduced to a rasp. He had refused the apothecary's order to remain aboard ship. Now he led the surviving assault elements into the Nexus breach with a replacement blade in one hand and a melter charge in the other. Hundreds of thralls waited inside. Wrath laughed when he saw them. It was not joy. It was hatred given breath. "There are not enough of you," he said. They came at him in a flood. He met them at the throat of the chamber. His first swing opened a militia officer from hip to shoulder. His second took both hands from a priest carrying a shock maul. A voidsman drove a blade between his armor plates. Wrath crushed the man's face against the wall and kept moving. Bolter fire tore into his side. He stumbled, rose, and drove the melter charge into the Nexus core, a pillar of black crystal and wet cable that pulsed with the Cacodominus's command. The alien spoke through every thrall around him. "Die again, little butcher." Wrath locked the charge. "No." He grinned through blood inside his helm. "Once is enough." He began the hate prayer as the chamber filled with bodies. "By the blood of the faithful, by the wrath of the throne, by the chains upon my hands and the blade in my fist." Thralls buried him. They stabbed, tore, clawed, and hammered at his armor. He kept chanting. Molten iron from damaged conduits poured across the floor, rising around his greaves. He drove his broken blade into the crystal core and held it there while the charge reached detonation. Let my death be a door that opens only forward. The nexus exploded. Molten iron, black crystal, flesh, and hundreds of bodies vanished in a burst of white heat. The shockwave tore through the surrounding corridors, flattening thralls and throwing Templars from their feet. The central nerve vault's outer seals ruptured. Psychic pressure vented through the fortress like a storm breaking from a tomb. Wrath died laughing the final word of the prayer. Forward. The way opened. Then the Cacodominus struck back. It did not use a gun. It did not use a blade. It reached through the broken lock with a concentrated pulse of psychic force and drove it into the command spine of the assault. Men screamed and fell. Mortal soldiers burst where they stood, blood jetting from eyes, mouths, and armor seals. Several Templars dropped to one knee as their auto-senses drowned in white noise. Marshal Serevan took the center of the blow. His armor held for a heartbeat. Then the seals around his joints began to vent steam. Blood cooked inside him. His flesh burned beneath the black plate. The veins in his face burst one by one behind his helm. He staggered, but did not fall. His sword point struck the deck, and he leaned upon it as the world became heat and pressure and the distant roar of the aliens' hatred. An apothecary reached him first. "My Lord Marshal, extraction is required." Serevan seized the apothecary by the gorget with a hand that trembled from cooked nerves. "No, your wounds are mortal. Then I am correctly placed." Reclusiarch Morkant came through the smoke with Emperor's champion Aldrich Thane beside him. A handful of surviving sword brethren followed, armor broken, tabards burned, weapons dripping. Beyond them lay the ruptured vault doors. Beyond those waited the final sanctum. Serevan turned his helm toward Thane. The marshal's voice was ruined, wet and harsh, but the command carried. "Open the way. Let the champion pass." Morkant lowered his skull helm. "It shall be done." Serevan released the apothecary and lifted his sword one final time. He faced the corridor behind them, where more thralls were coming, where dead brothers twitched, where the fortress itself screamed through ruptured walls. "I will hold what remains." Thane looked at him for the space of one breath. "No pity," Serevan said. "No pity," Thane answered. The champion entered the final passage with Morkant and the last of the sword brethren. Behind them, Marshal Odo Serevan met the oncoming dead with his sword raised and his blood boiling inside his armor. The corridor narrowed as it descended into the heart of the planetoid. Its walls were no longer armored merely with steel. They were lined with skulls, cables, and translucent sacs in which thoughts seemed to pulse like unborn organs. Every step drew them deeper into a pressure that made even transhuman bones ache. The chanting continued, but now it came from fewer throats. "Abhor the witch." A sword brother fell, blood pouring from his helm grill. "Destroy the witch." Another rose after death, and Morkant crushed him before the alien could make him fire. "Suffer not the unclean." The last door opened without touch. To live. The final sanctum stretched before them, vast as a cathedral hollowed inside a moon. Above its abyssal floor, suspended in a web of cables, skull racks, black iron ribs, stolen stars captured in crystal engines, and the screaming remains of choirs beyond counting, waited the Cacodominus. It hung like a god made from blasphemy. Its skull turned toward them, and every mouth in the sanctum smiled. The final sanctum was larger than reason. It had been hollowed from the heart of the planetoid, a cathedral cavern carved not for worship, but for domination. Its ceiling vanished into a storm of cables and suspended machinery. Its walls were armored with the hull plates of dead warships, each plate still bearing half-erased names, scorched aquilae, fragments of battle honors, and the black stains of crews, long rendered into fuel for the Xeno's will. Between those plates ran living conduits, pale and swollen, pulsing with fluids that were not wholly blood and not wholly machine coolant. Thousands of skulls hung in iron frames, their jaws wired open, their craniums pierced by psychic needles. Some were human, some were not. All of them whispered. At the center of the abyss, enthroned above a pit of moving cable and broken stars, hung the Cacodominus. Its body was enormous, yet withered, as though age had mummified a giant, and then machinery had refused to let the corpse become dust. Ancient alien flesh clung to a skeleton, reinforced by black iron spars and brass ribs. Augmetic plates had been bolted through hide that looked like old parchment stretched over tumors. Its arms were long, thin, and many-jointed, half natural, half mechanical, ending in hooked fingers and surgical claws. Its spine had been opened from crown to pelvis and threaded into a throne of nerve engines. Its skull was the worst of it, elongated, pale, and obscene, wreathed in cables, antennae, psychic crowns, and halo rings of rotating metal, inscribed with no imperial script. Where eyes should have been, there burned two deep wells of cold intelligence. It did not sit upon the machine. It had become the machine. It was alien corpse, machine throne, psychic engine, and tyrant soul, bound into one blasphemy of flesh and command. Around it hung choirs beyond counting, astropaths, navigators, priests, guardsmen, voidsmen, nobles, scribes, workers, and nameless men taken from 1,000 conquered worlds. They were suspended in circles, each wired into the great throne, each kept alive past mercy, each mouth open in silent anticipation. Beneath them, crystal engines held captured starlight in their cores, stolen suns burning inside cages of black glass. Emperor's champion. Aldrich Thane stepped onto the sanctum bridge with the black sword in both hands. Beside him came Reclusiarch Severian Morcant, his skull helm cracked, Crozius still burning despite the blood and ash that covered it. 5 sword brethren followed. No more. Their armor was split and dented. Their tabards were torn to black rags. One had only a combat blade left. Another carried a thunder hammer whose haft was bent and whose head sparked with a dying power field. They did not look upward in awe. They looked as executioners look at a condemned beast. The Cacodominus lowered its skull. The entire sanctum inhaled. Every bound mouth spoke at once. Little murder priests. The words did not echo. They entered the skull directly, pressing behind the eyes, grinding against memory, searching for weakness. One of the sword brethren staggered. Blood ran from the grill of his helm. He raised his bolter toward the alien, but his gauntlet trembled as though another hand had closed over his. Morcant struck the bridge with his Crozius. "Hold the vow!" The warrior straightened. "Abhor the witch," he rasped. The Cacodominus laughed with billions of throats. Gravity shifted. The bridge became a wall, then a floor again, then a sloping descent toward the abyss. One sword brother slid toward the edge, boots screeching against the black metal. Cables snapped upward from below and wrapped around him. He fired as they took him, bolt shells bursting among hanging bodies and spraying the air with blood and shredded organs. The cables dragged him into the pit. His armor vanished beneath a writhing mass of black conduits. His vox remained open long enough for his death scream to become the first note of an alien hymn. The remaining Templars advanced. Machine claws unfolded from the bridge rails. Morcant smashed one aside with the Crozius, caving in its joint and sending sparks across the path. Thane cut another in half. The black sword left a line of darkness through metal and meat alike. No glow haloed its edge. It was not beautiful. It was severe. A single line of human wrath moving through an empire of enslaved minds. The Cacodominus spoke through the hanging choirs. "Stop him." The bodies came alive, not all at once, but in waves. Suspended men tore free from their hooks, falling onto the bridge with cables trailing from their spines. Some broke bones upon landing and crawled anyway. Others rose with surgical tools, blades, las pistols, shock mauls, and bare hands. They were not warriors by nature. That did not matter. The alien filled them with command until pain, fear, and broken limbs became irrelevant. The sword brethren opened fire. Bolters detonated bodies at arm's length. A hanging priest burst from the waist upward, his ribs spraying outward like wet white fingers. A voidsman's head vanished in a red cloud, but his body kept walking for 3 steps before Morkant crushed the chest cavity with his Crozius. A noble officer stabbed a Templar through the thigh with a power blade, weeping beneath the alien's smile. The wounded warrior seized him by the skull and pulped his face against the bridge rail until the bone gave way. Still more came. The Cacodominus did not fight like a beast. It made the chamber itself fight. Gravity twisted again, hurling 2 Templars sideways into a wall of skull engines. Needles punched through their armor seals. One died instantly, his body going rigid as every organ ruptured under psychic pressure. The other tore at his helm with both hands, ripping the seals free, fingers digging beneath the gorget as if trying to claw the alien out of his own throat. His face came into view for 1 heartbeat, eyes swollen and bleeding, teeth bared in fury. "Destroy the witch," he choked. Then his skull burst inward, crushed by a force no hand could see. Morkant did not slow. He marched toward the throne with the Crozius raised, voice amplified until it shook dust from the dead warship plates lining the sanctum walls. "Cacodominus," he thundered, "hear your judgment." The alien's skull angled toward him. "You name me as though naming grants power. I name vermin so the blade knows where to fall." The choirs hissed. The psychic pressure deepened. Every hanging body began to twitch. The walls pulsed. The cables tightened around the throne like muscles around a heart. Morkant strode to the base of the final rise, standing. Below the suspended Xenos, as a priest before a gallows. "You have worn mankind as a cloak. Now mankind sends the blade." The Cacodominus answered with a vision. The sanctum vanished. Thane stood beneath a clear sky on a world untouched by smoke. Cities rose in perfect order. No hunger lines, no riots, no war banners, no screaming choirs. Across 1,300 systems, men worked, marched, prayed, built, harvested, and obeyed beneath one will. No governor rebelled, no captain fled, no soldier broke, no priest lied. Humanity was united in silence. Fleets moved without dispute. Worlds tithed without complaint. Crime ceased. Cowardice ceased. Heresy ceased. The Cacodominus stood beside him in the shape of a crowned shadow. "See what I offer. A species spared itself. One command, one order, one peace." Thane looked upon the vision and saw the lie beneath its symmetry. There was no choice in the workers' hands, no faith in the prayers, no courage in the soldiers, no loyalty in the captains, no soul in the survival. Men lived, but only as limbs. They obeyed, but not as servants of the Emperor. They endured, but not as mankind. It was unity without freedom, obedience without faith, survival without soul. The vision showed him a throne. Upon it, not the alien, but himself. Black-armored, sword across his knees, 1,300 systems kneeling beneath him, every voice awaiting his command. The shadow whispered, "Rule them. Do what your Imperium cannot. Order without weakness, mercy without confusion, faith without dissent. Take them from me. They already know how to kneel." Thane raised the black sword inside the vision. "I was not chosen to rule slaves." The shadow leaned close. "You were chosen to kill. Rulership is merely killing made permanent." Thane struck. The vision shattered. He was back in the sanctum, advancing through a storm of psychic force so dense it bowed his armor plates and drove blood from his eyes. His helm display had become a smear of red warning runes. The black sword shook in his gauntlets, not from fear, but from the pressure of the will arrayed against it. Around him, the last sword brethren died buying meters. One was impaled by a machine claw through the abdomen and still fired his pistol into the cable that held him. Another was lifted by invisible force and folded backward until his spine broke with a wet crack. His last Vox transmission was only laughter, harsh and defiant, before the alien crushed his lungs flat. Morkant saw the champion slowed by the psychic storm. He saw the neural engine beside the throne, a column of black crystal, exposed brain tissue, and brass conductor rings feeding power into the alien's skull crown. He understood what it was, without needing Mechanicus Cant to name it. It was one of the last chains binding the Cacodominus's mind to its vast network. It could not be allowed to stand. The Reclusiarch charged. The Cacodominus turned its full gaze upon him. Morkant's armor cracked across the chest. Blood burst from the seams at his elbows and gorget. His left eye boiled inside his skull helm, spilling down his cheek behind the bone mask. He staggered, but the Crozius remained high. "Abhor the witch," he said. A machine claw stabbed through his side. He stepped forward along its length, dragging it deeper through his own body so he could reach the engine. Destroy the witch. The bound choirs screamed at him in the voices of dying worlds. He did not answer them. Suffer not the unclean. He drove the Crozius into the neural engine. To live. The power field detonated inside the mechanism. Black crystal burst outward. Brass rings snapped. Nerve tissue exploded into a wet spray. Psychic lightning tore through Morkant, lifting him from the bridge and holding him upright, as if crucified by invisible hooks. His skull helm split. Fire poured from the eye lenses. His Crozius, still buried in the engine, burned white. The Cacodominus screamed in anger. Not amusement, not mockery, anger. The pressure around Thane faltered. The champion moved. He reached the first throne platform and cut through the cables that lashed out to stop him. Each severed conduit sprayed blood, oil, and pale sparks. The Cacodominus lowered one vast claw. Thane met it with the black sword, carving through 3 talons and a length of augmetic bone. The alien's flesh recoiled, not with fear, but with insult. "You are small," it thundered through the choirs. Thane climbed the steps of the skull throne. He struck the torso first, opening ancient flesh from rib to pelvis. Black ichor and machine fluid poured from the wound, splashing across the platform and smoking where it struck. He struck again, severing a cluster of cables from the alien's spine. The sanctum lurched. Somewhere far away, a hive world lost the rhythm of its obedience and began to scream with human throats. The Cacodominus slammed a psychic command into him. "Kneel." The word carried the weight of planets. Thane dropped to one knee. The alien bent above him, skull crown blazing. "Kneel, and I will let your species remain useful." Thane drove the black sword into the platform and used it to rise. No. He tore the blade free and hacked upward into the alien's throat. The cut opened a channel of black blood and exposed cables. The Cacodominus recoiled, cables tightening, throne engines shrieking, choir mouths vomiting blood as the psychic web strained to keep its master whole. Morkant, still impaled by lightning, turned his ruined helm toward Thane. "Finish," he whispered. Then the Reclusiarch died, and the last light of his Crozius consumed the neural engine entirely. The Cacodominus struck with everything it had left. The voices of billions begged Thane to stop. They cried as fathers, brothers, sons, soldiers, priests, children, shipmasters, serfs, prisoners, nobles, and dying astropaths. They begged in High Gothic and Low Gothic, in Hive Cant, Void Cant, machine code, battlefield slang, and wordless human pain. They showed him worlds that would fall without command, ships that would be lost, men who would wake into madness, subsectors that would starve. They made every consequence a face and hurled those faces into his soul. Thane kept walking. Every step was condemnation. Every breath was debt. Every heartbeat was the Emperor's name hammered inside his chest like a war drum. He reached the skull throne. The Cacodominus lowered its vast head until its eye wells filled his world. I am the mind that conquered 1,300 systems, it said. What are you? Thane raised the black sword in both hands. The execution. He drove the blade into the alien's skull. The black sword punched through bone, crown metal, psychic circuitry, and the living core beneath. The Cacodominus convulsed. Cables snapped across the sanctum like whips. Choir bodies burst apart in rings, showering the bridge in blood, bone, and burning wire. Gravity failed. The pit below opened into a storm of light. Thane held the sword in the skull throne and tore downward with all the strength left in his transhuman frame. The psychic core split. For one heartbeat, there was silence. The Cacodominus smiled through broken metal and dying flesh. It had known. Its empire did not fade gently. It collapsed inward. The minds of 1,300 systems, the screaming relays, the pain engines, the enslaved choirs, the chained navigators, the wired populations, the dreadblade thrones, the fortress moons, the ship organs, the broken star, the psychic locks, every stolen command and every imposed obedience drew back toward the murdered skull in a single impossible contraction. Then it erupted through the warp. The first note of the howling was not sound. It was not thought. It was death becoming transmission. It passed through the sanctum, and every astropath in the system ignited like a candle. The death of the Cacodominus did not remain inside its skull. It opened. For one impossible instant, the final sanctum was a pit of white silence. The black sword stood buried in the torn ruin of the Xenos throne, its blade driven through alien bone, psychic circuitry, and the split core of a dominion that had worn 1,300 systems as a body. Emperor's champion. Aldrich Thane hung against the weapon with both gauntlets locked around the hilt, his armor cracked, his vision drowned in blood, his mind held together by hatred, duty, and the last ember of the vow. Then the silence became a scream. It was not heard. Hearing was too small a thing. It passed through ears without needing them. It passed through armor, stone, void shields, ship hulls, prayer wards, machine logic, the sealed skulls of the dead, and the living terror of the warp. It was the death of an alien tyrant stretched across enslaved stars, collapsing through every nerve it had built, every mind it had entered, every choir it had tortured into obedience. The howling began. The final sanctum came apart around Thane. The suspended choirs ignited first. Astropaths chained above the abyss burned from within, their blind heads turning to lamps of white fire before their skulls split and emptied flame. Navigators shrieked as their third eyes burst open and poured light into the chamber. Thralls still wired into the throne convulsed with such force that hooks tore through their flesh and flung them in bloody arcs across the bridge. Some died as instruments of the Xenos. Some woke for less than a heartbeat and died as men. One guardsman, hanging by cables through his spine, looked down at his own hands, as if seeing them for the first time. "What have I done?" he whispered. Then the howling reached the memory of what he had done, and his heart burst inside his chest. The cables holding the Cacodominus snapped one by one, lashing across the sanctum like the tendons of a dying god. Each severed line sprayed black ichor, machine oil, and psychic fire. The Xeno's body spasmed upon the throne, skull split from crown to jaw by Thane's killing stroke, yet the broken thing still seemed to smile. Not with flesh, with consequence. Its death was not surrender. Its death was a weapon finally released. Across Catalexis Prime, the scream struck the fleet. Aboard the Judgment of Dawn, every astropath in the sanctum died at once. Some burned cleanly, collapsing into ash inside their iron thrones. Others exploded in showers of bone, blood, and white flame, painting the walls with cooked brain matter and fragments of silvered restraint. The choir vault doors warped outward under pressure. Chapter serfs guarding them were thrown down the passage, their armor blackened, their faces erased by heat. The last transmission from the sanctum was no plea. No warning, no prayer, only a single word, spoken in the voice of the dead Xenos. Remember. Then the Vox shrieked hard enough to shatter glass across 3 decks. On the bridge, Navy officers tore at their own eyes. Helmsmen slammed their heads against command consoles until their skulls cracked. A gunnery master began reciting every name of every shell he had ever fired, weeping as if each munition had been a son. Armsmen opened fire into empty corners, screaming that the walls were speaking. Some were shot by commissarial order. Others were trampled when the deck pitched under another psychic shockwave. The Black Templars endured better, but endurance was not immunity. Warriors in full plate dropped dead where they stood, blood leaking from their helm seals, hearts ruptured by pressure no apothecary could name. Others fell to one knee and kept chanting until the Howling stripped the last breath from them. One sword brother raised his bolter toward a brother beside him, not from betrayal, but because the dead voice of the Cacodominus had crawled through the damaged systems of his armor and seized the weapon servos. He fought it long enough to turn the barrel under his own chin. "Abhor," he said. The bolter fired. In the lower decks, dead Templars twitched again, not as weapons now, but as echoes of the aliens' collapsing dominion. Armor locked and spasmed, fingers clawed at empty air. Broken helms emitted fragments of old vows, twisted with Xeno's laughter. Chaplains moved among them with bolt pistols and Crozius, granting final silence to anything that moved after death. The Mechanicus suffered in a different manner. Magos Dominus Hesteron 9 received the Howling as data. For a fraction of a heartbeat, the Xeno's death scream entered every open channel, every feedback loop, every cogitator shrine, every automata control remnant, every noospheric wafer, every sacred calculation left exposed to the psychic storm. It was not code, but it wore the shape of code so that machines would try to understand it. Adepts screamed Binharic curses as their cranial implants overheated. Servo skulls spoke in dead languages and detonated. Data scribes carved alien equations into their own arms with stylus blades until tech marines executed them. Hesteron 9 drove 3 mechadendrites through his own auxiliary cortex banks and tore them free before the possession could climb deeper. His bronze mask split along one cheek from internal heat. "Contamination severed," he rasped. A nearby adept turned toward him with green light bleeding from his eye lenses. "Dominion persists," the adept said in the voice of the Cacodominus. Hesteron 9's plasma cutter unfolded and burned the adept's head from his shoulders. "Dominion terminated," the Magos replied. Beyond the fleet, the enslaved worlds of Catalexis Prime woke and died in waves. On Fortress Moons, armies froze mid-charge. Some men dropped weapons and looked at the carnage around them with human horror restored to their faces. Some fell to their knees and begged the Emperor to forgive names they could not count. Others simply died, the alien command withdrawn so violently that their hearts forgot how to beat. In the hive cities, billions screamed with their own voices. Entire crowds collapsed in avenues slick with the blood they had spilled under another will. Priests awoke at desecrated altars and saw the bodies wired into the bells. Governors regained themselves upon thrones of butchered officials and ordered their own execution before madness took them. Many did not wake cleanly. The Cacodominus's final thought passed through them like a burning brand. "I was the order beneath your chaos." Men screamed that sentence as their minds came apart. Ship crews repeated it while opening airlocks. Surviving thralls clawed the words into their skin. Whole Hab districts became choruses of dying confession and alien memory. Then the psychic backlash rolled on, leaving silence, fire, and the slow collapse of systems that had forgotten how to move without the tyrant inside their skulls. The Howling did not stop at Catalexis Prime. It ran into the warp. It found the channels the Cacodominus had widened with torture. It found astropathic routes, choir echoes, navigation paths, relay scars, and the fragile psychic infrastructure by which the Imperium spoke to itself across impossible night. It burned outward with the speed of nightmare. Across the Imperium, 1 billion astropaths burned out. Choirs died in relay stations that had never heard the name Catalexis. Blind servants of the throne ignited in palace basements, shrine ships, war fleets, fortress monasteries, pilgrim stations, merchant vessels, and lonely outposts beyond known routes. Some screamed once, some transmitted fragments of the alien's death for days before their bodies failed. Many simply went silent, leaving entire sectors deaf. The Astronomicon itself was distorted by the passage of the scream. Navigators saw the Emperor's light bend, shiver, and fracture behind the afterimage of a dying Xenos mind. Ships translated into real space in the wrong centuries, the wrong systems, or not at all. Millions of vessels were lost in the ensuing blindness: merchant convoys, crusade fleets, tithe barges, pilgrim ships, prison hulks, warships, courier vessels, and unnamed craft carrying men who never knew why the stars betrayed them. Subsectors slid into barbarism. Without the diktats of the Adeptus Terra, governors became kings, then tyrants, then corpses. Tithe chains broke. Forge worlds starved for ore. Agri worlds drowned in surplus no ship came to collect. Shrine worlds tore themselves apart over contradictory revelations carried by dying astropaths. Imperial law arrived too late, or not at all. The scream of the slain Cacodominus became famine, mutiny, isolation, warlordism, and generations of darkness. And still, inside the dying throne room, Aldrich Thane lived. No one could say how. His armor was ruined. Blood ran from every seal. The black sword had cracked the psychic core, and the backlash had driven him across the platform hard enough to break stone and bone alike. Yet he rose, slowly, one movement at a time, not because survival remained a promise, but because duty had not yet dismissed him. The body of the Cacodominus sagged in its harness above him, vast and split, cables twitching like dying worms. Its skull hung half-severed from the machine crown, the cut through it wide enough to show blackened circuitry, pale alien bone, and the guttering remains of psychic organs that had once commanded worlds. Thane climbed. He used broken cables as handholds. He drove the black sword into the throne casing to pull himself upward. Every movement tore something inside him. He heard voices trying to become words. He ignored them. He reached the skull, braced one boot against the shattered crown, and tore. Metal screamed. Bone cracked. The skull came free in a gout of black ichor and white fire. It was too large for a mortal man to carry. Thane was not mortal. Even so, it dragged at him like a moon. He descended from the throne with the severed skull chained in cable and held against his armor, while the final sanctum died around him. The skull still whispered, not loudly, not with the dominion it had held before, but enough. Enough for the living to know it was not harmless. Enough for the dead to seem almost listening. The survivors found Marshal Serevan before they found the champion. He sat against a broken bulkhead in the passage beyond the nerve vault, sword still in hand, surrounded by dead thralls and shattered machine parts. His armor had been cooked black from the inside. The blood that had leaked from his seals had dried in dark bands across the deck. Around him lay bodies piled 3 and 4 deep, some cut apart, some burned, some crushed beneath fallen plating. He had held the corridor until nothing living remained before him. A command scroll was locked beneath his left gauntlet. The script upon it was short. "The witch is dead. Continue the crusade." No one cheered when the words were read. The surviving Black Templars did not celebrate. Celebration belonged to clean victories, and there had been nothing clean in Catalexis. The Xenos was dead. That truth mattered. The psychic empire was broken. That truth mattered more. 1,300 systems had been torn from the grip of an alien tyrant whose will had made mankind into a single screaming instrument. Yet the cost did not vanish, because the deed was righteous. The death of the Cacodominus had murdered servants who had never seen its throne. It had crippled roots far beyond the war zone. It had cast ships into oblivion, blinded choirs, broken fleets, and plunged distant regions into silence. The Black Templars had saved humanity from a psychic empire, and the price of that salvation would be paid by men not yet born, on worlds that would never learn the name of the monster whose death had damned them to isolation. Victory was real. Victory was necessary. Victory was monstrous. That was the truth the Imperium understood better than any civilization that had ever crawled beneath the stars. Thane was carried back to the Judgment of Dawn, though no record agreed whether he still breathed when the apothecaries sealed the chapel doors. Some said he walked unaided into the Reclusiam and placed the black sword upon the altar before collapsing. Some said he spoke once, naming the Emperor, and then never again. Some said he did not die, but was taken into a silence reserved for weapons too sacred to discard and too wounded to use. The black sword was returned to the Reclusiam. The skull was chained beneath wards, seals, iron scripture, machine locks, purity brands, and the constant presence of chaplains. It became the skull of the Cacodominus, a relic not of triumph alone, but of warning. Even severed from its empire, even stripped of throne and body, even reduced to bone and dead circuitry, it whispered through its chains. Sometimes it spoke in the voices of burned astropaths, sometimes in the voices of dead Templars, sometimes in no voice at all, only pressure, only memory, only the shape of command pressing against the edge of thought. No warrior was permitted to stand before it without prayer. No serf was permitted near it without execution guard. No one called it harmless. In time, the Catalexis heresy entered imperial record, as such things always did, sanitized, sealed, fragmented, contradictory, and buried beneath black wax, redacted parchment, and the cold indifference of distant offices. The official account said that the Black Templars prosecuted a crusade against the alien cyborg psyker known as the Cacodominus. It said that the Xenos had ruled 1,300 systems. It said that the Black Templars executed it. It said that the event known as the Howling followed, with catastrophic losses among astropathic choirs and void traffic. It did not describe the smell of the throne room. It did not describe the sound of dying choirs as their souls ignited. It did not describe Varadon Secundus waking beneath its own rubble. It did not describe Gethsemar's people marching into furnaces. It did not describe Castellan Karsk holding a breach beneath an apostate knight. It did not describe Wrath laughing under molten iron. It did not describe Morkant driving his Crozius into the neural engine while his body came apart. It did not describe Marshal Serevan seated among the dead with his final order beneath his hand. It did not describe the worlds that never received rescue because the scream had swallowed the roads to them. The record endured because records were easier to preserve than truth. The crusade moved on because crusades did not end merely because one horror had been slain. Somewhere in the warp, the echo continued. Not always, not loudly, not in any rhythm sane minds could measure. It moved through storms and dead roots, through the after-image of burned choirs, through the places where ships vanished and prayers returned unanswered. The howling faded, but it did not wholly cease. Nothing that had ruled so many minds died in a manner wholly quiet. In the holds of a Black Templars crusade fleet, far from Catalexis, and yet never free of it, the skull of the Cacodominus whispered through its chains. A chaplain standing watch before the reliquary heard the first syllable form inside the iron dark. He raised his Crozius. Around him, the warriors began the vow. The whisper grew. The chaplain turned his skull helm toward the assembled brethren and gave the only order that mattered. Pray louder,